Hello guys, welcome to Supreme Harry. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if Goblin inheritance specialist found Harry at age 7 starving and discovered 26 stolen Lordships Dumbledore sold illegally? If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, The weight of a child. The alley smelled like wet cardboard and something worse underneath, the kind of smell that accumulates when nobody checks on a place for weeks. Ragnock Stonefist had walked through Goblin war tunnels that smelled better. He picked his way past a collapsed bin and a rusted bicycle frame, his inheritance detection rod humming in his left hand with the particular high, anxious frequency that had pulled him out of his office at 9:30 on a Thursday morning and sent him to Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. He hadn't expected much. Anomalous inheritance signatures happened. Vaults threw echoes sometimes, especially old ones with complicated entailment clauses. He'd expected to find a confused squib or a piece of mislaid heirloom jewelry radiating residual magic from someone's dustbin. He'd done this kind of field work 100 times in 2 centuries of service to Gringotts. It was usually paperwork with legs. The rod nearly jumped out of his hand. Ragnock stopped walking. The signature coming off whatever was at the end of this alley wasn't a squib. It wasn't jewelry. It was a living magical core, multiple living magical cores, layered on top of each other in a configuration he had only ever seen in inheritance documents, never in a person. Ancient cores. Pre-Norman cores. The kind that came from lines so old they predated the Wiesengemot by 8 centuries. He moved faster. The boy was behind the bin. Curled against the brick wall with his knees pulled to his chest and his arms wrapped around them, wearing a t-shirt 3 sizes too large and trousers that might have fit someone twice his size. No shoes. His glasses were cracked down one lens. He was thin in the way that made Ragnock's jaw tighten, not thin like a child who hadn't eaten lunch, but thin like a child who had learned to ignore hunger because acknowledging it never helped. His hair was a black catastrophe around a face that was all enormous green eyes and sharp angles where there should have been softness. He was watching Ragnock with the particular stillness of a creature that has learned that staying very quiet is sometimes the only defense available. He didn't look frightened, exactly. He looked like he'd moved past frightened some time ago and arrived somewhere quieter. Ragnock crouched down. He was not a tall being, goblins rarely were, but he made himself smaller anyway, which was not something he did often or easily. He set the inheritance rod on the ground between them where the boy could see it. "You're Harry Potter," Ragnock said. It wasn't a question. The rod was practically vibrating. The boy's eyes cut to the rod, then back to Ragnock's face. "You're a goblin," he said. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in a while. Ragnock Stonefist. Senior Inheritance Specialist, Gringotts Bank. He reached into his coat and produced his identification, a small bronze disc engraved with the Gringotts seal, which he held out flat on his palm. "I'm not here to take you anywhere against your will. I followed a magical signature and it led me to you. I need to ask you some questions, if you're willing." Harry looked at the bronze disc for a long moment. Then he looked at the inheritance rod still humming quietly on the ground. "What does that thing say about me?" Ragnock glanced at the rod. The frequency had stabilized into a chord, a deep, resonant, wrong chord that he recognized now for what it was. Not the sound of a healthy inheritance signature. The sound of one that had been cut open and stitched back together badly, over and over, like someone performing surgery with a fish knife. "It says," Ragnock said carefully, "that you are owed a great deal of money. And that someone has been stealing from you for quite some time." Something moved in Harry's face. Not surprise. More like the expression of someone who has always suspected the ground beneath them was hollow, and just had that suspicion confirmed. "How long have you been out here?" Ragnock asked. "Since Tuesday." Harry's chin came up slightly. "I left. Wasn't going back. It was Thursday. 2 days. Ragnock looked at the boy's bare feet on the concrete, the hollows beneath his cheekbones, the way he held himself very still to conserve energy, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Goblins were not a sentimental species. They were a precise species, which was different. And the precise calculation he was running right now said that this child, this catastrophically robbed, magically significant, 7-year-old child, had been sitting in an alley for 2 days and nobody had come looking. "Where are your guardians?" he asked. "Number 4, Privet Drive." Harry's voice was completely flat. "They don't come looking." Ragnar picked up the inheritance rod, stood, and made a decision of the kind that he suspected would change the next several years of his professional life considerably. "Harry Potter," he said, "I would like to take you to Gringotts Bank. You will be fed, clothed, and housed in our guest quarters while I conduct a formal inheritance audit on your behalf. You are not obligated to come. But I believe what I find will be of significant interest to you." He paused. "I also believe you have nowhere else to go." Harry looked at him for another long moment. Then he uncurled himself from the wall, wincing slightly as he stood. His feet, Ragnar noted, had several small cuts on them, and picked up a small bundle from behind the bin. A pillowcase with handles made from knotted strips of fabric. Inside, from the shape of it, a few books and not much else. "You can do magic to get us there?" Harry asked. "Yes." "Okay." He slung the pillowcase over his shoulder. "Let's go." He didn't ask about the Dursleys. He didn't look back down the alley toward Privet Drive. He just stood there in his cracked glasses and his enormous shirt and his bare feet, with the specific posture of someone who had decided that the past was already gone and the only direction worth looking was forward. Ragnar Stonefist, who had conducted inheritance audits for 217 years and had seen a great many remarkable things, looked at this 7-year-old boy and thought, very quietly, "Oh." The portkey he produced was a standard Gringotts issue transit token, silver stamped with the bank's address. He held it out. Harry took it without hesitation, no flinching, no nervousness, despite the fact that he almost certainly had never used one before. The alley dissolved in a twist of cold air. Gringotts at 10 in the morning was all marble and chandelier light and the controlled chaos of several dozen transactions happening simultaneously across the main floor. The tellers at their high counters didn't look up when Ragnar arrived via the transit platform. Unauthorized portkey arrivals from field operatives were common enough, but they certainly looked up when they saw what he'd brought with him. A child. A human child, barefoot and underweight, standing in the middle of the Gringotts main hall looking up at the vaulted ceiling with the focused attention of someone taking inventory. Ragnar steered him through the main floor with a hand that hovered near but didn't quite touch the boy's shoulder. He'd noticed Harry had a particular stillness when physical contact was initiated unexpectedly, the stillness of someone who'd learned that unexpected touches were rarely friendly, and through the door marked Private, Inheritance Division in both English and gobbledygook. The inheritance offices were quieter. Dark wood paneling, deep shelves full of ledgers so old their spines had gone soft, a series of examining tables covered in the felt-like material that allowed inheritance instruments to function without interference. Ragnar's assistant, a younger goblin named Griphook who was new enough to the division to still look surprised by things, was at the secondary desk when they came in. Griphook looked at Harry. Then at Ragnar. Then at Harry again. "Griphook," Ragnar said, "please bring food. The full kitchen order, not the meeting tray. And the Delacroix Heritage Chair, please. We'll need it calibrated." Griphook moved quickly. That was one of his better qualities. Ragnar guided Harry to the examining table, which was chest height on an adult wizard and therefore exactly at eye level for a 7-year-old. Harry set his pillowcase down beside it and looked at the various instruments arranged along the shelf with the expression of someone reading an interesting display at a museum. "What do all of these do?" he asked. "They measure different aspects of magical inheritance. Bloodline, core strength, entailment chains, active and dormant lordship claims." Ragnar selected the primary heritage rod, a larger, more sophisticated version of the field instrument he'd carried in the alley, and set it on the table. "The process involves you placing your hand on the central plate. The instruments do the rest." "Does it hurt?" No. Then why are you being careful about it? Ragnar looked at him. The boy was watching him with those green eyes, steady and entirely serious. 7 years old. Because what I found in the alley suggests that your inheritance has been significantly interfered with, and people who have their inheritance interfered with sometimes find the audit process distressing. Emotionally. Harry considered this. What you find won't change what happened. I'd rather just know. Ragnar thought that was one of the most adult things he'd heard a child say, and that it was also one of the saddest. He nodded and moved to prepare the instruments. Griphook returned with food, a tray that appeared to have been assembled with some urgency but genuine effort, thick bread, soft cheese, sliced meat, a bowl of something warm that steamed, a glass of juice. Harry looked at it and then looked away, with the rigid discipline of someone who had learned that wanting things openly was dangerous. Eat, Ragnar said, without looking up from the instruments. The audit can wait 10 minutes. There was a pause. I'm not, you've been outside for 2 days and before that, based on your current weight, not eating adequately for considerably longer. Eat. I'm not making a charitable gesture, I'm ensuring the audit subject is in stable condition for testing. It's procedural. He heard the sound of a chair scraping, and then after a moment, the sound of a spoon against a bowl. Ragnar calibrated the heritage rod. He calibrated the bloodline amplifier. He prepared the entailment scanner, which was an older instrument, brass and deep mahogany, that required physical contact with the subject's dominant hand and took approximately 40 minutes to produce results complex enough to be worth reading. Then he set up the core depth meter, the Lordship recognition array, 7 crystalline nodes on a curved rail, normally enough for even the most complicated inheritance situations, and the suppression detector. He added 3 more nodes to the Lordship recognition array. Then, after a moment's consideration, he added 4 more. He had worked in inheritance for 217 years. He was not a man who operated on hunches. But the chord that inheritance rod had sung in that alley was still in his ears, and he was adding nodes to the array because every part of his professional experience was telling him to prepare for something he had never actually seen in practice. Harry finished the food, not quickly, not slowly, with the methodical focus of someone who decided to be sensible about it, and set down the spoon. He looked at the array. He looked at all the instruments. 14 nodes, he said. Yes. Most people only need 7. Most people, yes. Harry's face didn't change much, but something in it sharpened. He slid off the chair and came to stand by the examining table, and without being asked, he placed his right hand flat on the central plate. The array lit up. Ragnar had prepared himself. He was a professional. He had been doing this for 217 years. All 14 nodes lit. The bloodline amplifier sang a chord so deep it vibrated in the floor. The entailment scanner's needle swung hard to the right and then kept going, past the calibrated range, into the zone marked, in the brass, worn almost smooth, with the ancient gobbledygook word that translated roughly to beyond expected parameters. The suppression detector made a sound like someone had struck a cracked bell. Then it made the sound again. And again. And again. Ragnar counted. He stopped counting at 17 distinct suppression signatures and made himself start over, more carefully. 23. 24. 25. He stopped the count, reached for his notepad, and began writing with the focused, controlled movements of a goblin who was very determined not to show what he was feeling on his face. 26. 26 distinct suppression signatures. 26 separate inheritance chains had been interrupted, bound, or redirected away from this child. Some were small, minor entailed properties, secondary vault interests. Others were not small at all. Others were the kind of thing that, when he cross-referenced them against the bloodline amplifier reading, made him set down his pen and stand very still for a moment with his eyes closed. Harry was watching him. That's a lot, isn't it? Yes, Ragnar said. That is a great deal. He opened his eyes and looked at the boy across the examining table. Harry. I need you to understand something before I continue. What these instruments are showing me represents, potentially, the largest single inheritance fraud I have encountered in my professional career. The implications of what I'm reading are going to take time to fully trace, verify, and document. This is not a simple morning's work. How large? Harry asked. Ragnar glanced at the bloodline amplifier, which had now produced a printed roll of heritage tape, the physical record of active and dormant lines, that extended nearly 2 feet off the edge of the table. The 26 suppressed chains, he said, represent, at minimum, 26 separate noble or lordship claims. Some appear to be lordships in their own right. Some appear to be entailed subclaims under larger houses. Several of the larger signatures are, he stopped. Started again. Harry. Several of these signatures correspond to seats on the Wiesengemot. The room was very quiet. The suppression signatures, Ragnar continued, because he was a professional and he would see this through, do not occur naturally. They are the result of deliberate magical intervention. Complex intervention, ritual-grade binding work, applied more than once over a period of years. The oldest suppression layer I can see here was applied approximately 6 years ago. Harry's eyes went briefly unfocused. 6 years ago. 1 year old. Who did it? He asked. Ragnar looked at the entailment scanner, which had now produced enough data for him to cross-reference the suppression method signatures against Gringotts' vault intervention records. He had suspected. He had more than suspected, in the way that a specialist of 2 centuries experience suspects things before he can prove them. The cross-reference took about 30 seconds. Then he knew. He stood very still again for a moment. Because knowing was different from suspecting, even when you'd been almost certain. The magical signature on the suppression work, he said quietly, is consistent with the authorization codes for vault access granted to, he checked the record twice. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Something happened in Harry's face. A stillness deeper than the stillness before. He nodded once, very slightly, like something had just been confirmed rather than revealed. How long has he been doing it? Harry asked. The layers date back to shortly after your parents' deaths in 1981. The most recent appears to be, Ragnar checked. Approximately 18 months ago. He keeps coming back to do it, Harry said. Yes. Harry looked at the 14-node array, all of them still lit, several of them pulsing softly in the way nodes did when they were still pulling data from a particularly deep source. Then he looked at Ragnar. Can you stop it? The suppressions? Yes. Removing the bindings is within Gringotts' legal authority under the Inheritance Protection Act of 879. We do not require ministry approval to do so. We require only confirmation of blood identity, which, he gestured at the instruments, you have provided in considerable abundance. Then do it. There will be consequences, Ragnar said. When suppressions of this magnitude are removed, your core will expand. The abilities and inheritances that have been bound will become active. It will be significant. How significant? Ragnar thought about how to phrase this. Have you ever heard of a creature inheritance? He asked. Harry blinked. No. Some very old magical bloodlines carry non-human ancestry. Not in any way that affects appearance or daily function, but in ways that augment magical capacity and grant specific abilities. The bloodline amplifier is indicating that you carry at least one such inheritance, which has also been suppressed. He paused. When the bindings are removed, you will be different than you are now. More. Do you understand? I've been less than I should be my whole life, Harry said. Yes. Do it. Ragnar looked at him for a moment. This child. This small, sharp, terrifyingly composed child. He nodded. He brought out the unbinding instruments. The process took 2 hours. It wasn't painful, Ragnar had told the truth about that. But it wasn't nothing, either. As each successive binding layer was peeled back, Harry sat very still in the heritage chair with his hands flat on the armrests and his jaw set, and Ragnar watched the color come back into his face in stages. Not just health, though that, too, the hollows filling slightly in real time, the cuts on his feet closing, which was the creature inheritance asserting itself, but presence. The sense that there was more of him than there had been 10 minutes ago. By the time the last binding came off, Harry's green eyes had gone luminous. Not glowing, nothing so dramatic, but the kind of luminous that deep water gets when there's something large moving underneath it. He sat quietly for a moment after Ragnar finished. Then he raised one hand and looked at it. "I can feel them," he said. Whatever they are. The inheritances. What does it feel like?" Ragnar asked. Harry thought about it. Like hearing a song that you know you've heard before but couldn't remember. And now you can. He lowered his hand and looked at Ragnar. "What are they?" "The 26. Ragnar sat down across from him with the heritage tape and his notes and a large cup of the very strong tea that Griphook had, with considerable foresight, left on the desk. He spread the tape across the table. "Let me tell you about your family," he said. The heritage tape was a physical map of bloodlines, printed in dense gobbledygook with color-coded threads of inheritance running between family names. Harry's was extraordinary, not just in length, which was significant, but in the shape of it. Most heritage tapes were trees, roots going back, branches spreading forward. Harry's looked more like a river delta. Lines converging from multiple directions into a single point. "Your father's line," Ragnar said, running a finger along a gold thread that went deep into the tape, "is the House of Potter. Active Lordship, Gringotts seat. One of the older half-blood noble houses, established in the 13th century. He moved to a second thread, this one dark blue. But through your great-grandmother on the Potter side, you have a secondary claim to the House of Peveril." Harry was very quiet. "The Peverils," Ragnar said, "were the original holders of 3 objects you may not have heard of yet. They are significant. The house has been considered extinct for centuries because the bloodline appeared to thin to nothing. It didn't. It went through the Potters. So I'm the last descendant of the Peveril line." "Yes. Dormant Lordship, because the house was never formally dissolved, simply assumed extinct. The claim is valid." "That's 2, Harry said. "Yes. Now your mother's line is where it becomes," Ragnar chose his word carefully. "Extensive. Lily Potter, née Evans, had been considered Muggle-born. The entire wizarding world had accepted this. Lily Potter had believed it herself. Her parents had been a Muggle couple in Cokeworth, and before them were several generations of apparently ordinary people, and that was the end of it, as far as anyone had looked. Gringotts had looked further. "Your mother's line," Ragnar said, "is not Muggle-born. The Evans family carries a suppressed magical inheritance that goes back, significantly further. The magic in her bloodline was bound so many generations ago that the memory of it was entirely lost. What we can trace, through the instruments, is that the Evans line descends, in the maternal branch, 7 generations back, from the House of Gryffindor." The room was so quiet that Ragnar could hear the heritage tape rustling slightly in the air from the vents. "Godric Gryffindor," Harry said. His line did not end with his documented descendants. There was a daughter, unacknowledged, raised in the Muggle world by choice during a period of extreme magical persecution, whose descendants retained the blood but lost the knowledge. Your mother carried it. You carry it. Ragnar set his pen down. Which means you hold the dormant lordship of Gryffindor. Harry stared at the heritage tape. Then, quietly, that's 3. That's 3, Ragnar confirmed. Would you like me to continue, or shall I continue? It took another hour and a half. Ragnar went through them methodically, as he had been trained to do, as he had done for 2 centuries. But he had never had cause to do it quite like this. By blood and by conquest and by entailment and by the obscure wizarding law of hereditas jasons, inheritance that lies waiting, Harry Potter held valid claim to 26 separate noble houses. Some were British. 2 were French, through a secondary Peveril line. 1 was Irish. 3 had Wisengamot seats. Several had associated properties that were currently occupied by other families who had purchased them through intermediaries without knowing, or choosing not to know, the precise provenance of what they were buying. The 3 Wisengamot seats, Harry said, when Ragnarok finished. Potter, Gryffindor, and which other? Slytherin, Ragnarok said. Harry looked up from the tape. The Slytherin line did not end with Voldemort, Ragnarok said. It ended several generations before him. The man who called himself Lord Voldemort was a descendant of Salazar Slytherin through a single surviving line that has now been extinguished. But Salazar Slytherin had 2 lines. One produced the Gaunt family. The other, the elder line, was believed extinct. He touched a silver thread on the heritage tape. It's not. It passed through a cadet branch that went into France in the 15th century and then returned to Britain through a marriage connection to your mother's side of the family. A different branch than the Gryffindor connection. It is, he paused, extremely old, and extremely valid. So I'm the heir of both Gryffindor and Slytherin, Harry said. Among 23 others, yes. Harry looked at the heritage tape for a long time. The luminous quality in his eyes had deepened. When he finally spoke, his voice was completely even. You said Dumbledore has been selling these. The Lordships. The instruments indicate the suppression work included redirection of Lordship recognition. When a Lord's claim is suppressed at the core level and then a Lordship recognition transfer is filed at the Ministry, Ragnarok's voice was dry as paper, it can appear to later claimants that the title was legitimately purchased. Whether the Ministry official who processed those transfers knew the source was fraudulent, or chose not to investigate, is a matter for another day. How much? Harry asked. I beg your pardon. How much did he sell them for? Ragnarok looked at his records. He had run the preliminary cross-reference during the unbinding process. Based on the vault transaction records we can access, and we will access all of them, I assure you, the suppressed lordship claims were transferred for approximately 4,800,000 galleons in total. Spread across multiple transactions between 1981 and 1989. That's 8 years of selling them, Harry said. Yes. The money went where? Various accounts. Several appear to be discretionary funds associated with Dumbledore's positions, Chief Warlock of the Wisengamot, Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation. Others went to the purchasing families directly as transaction costs. Ragnarok paused. There are also indications of payments to at least 3 ministry officials, based on the transaction timing and the account signatures, but those will require further investigation to confirm. Harry nodded. He picked up the heritage tape and looked at it. Ragnarok. Yes. I want all of it back. Yes, Ragnarok said. I rather thought you might. And I want the people who took it to have to explain, publicly, in front of everyone, exactly what they did and why they thought they could. Ragnarok felt something he didn't often feel settle into his chest, a kind of deep, precise satisfaction, the satisfaction of 2 centuries worth of watching wizards steal and be celebrated for it, meeting for the first time a single wizard who intended to not let them. Then, he said, we have a great deal of work to do. He called for Grip Hook and asked him to bring the senior legal team, the full vault access records from 1981 onward, and another kitchen tray because the afternoon was going to be long. Harry spread the heritage tape flat on the table and began reading it. Not scanning, reading, with the focused attention he'd used on Ragnarok's rod in the alley, on the instruments in the examining room. Taking it in. Learning it. While Grip Hook scrambled to assemble the legal team, Ragnarok sat across from the boy and watched him read the record of everything that had been stolen from him, and thought about what it was going to look like when this child, this precise, luminous, entirely fearless child, walked into the Wisengamot and opened his mouth. He thought about the expression that was going to be on Albus Dumbledore's face. He allowed himself a small smile, which was not something he did often. The afternoon light came through the high windows of the inheritance office in long gold bars, catching the dust motes that the sudden expansion of Harry Potter's magical core had disturbed from every surface in the room. The heritage tape rustled. The 14 nodes on the Lordship array had finally gone dim, their work done, their data recorded. Outside in the main hall of Gringotts, the ordinary business of the wizarding world continued, transactions and deposits and withdrawals and the routine maintenance of wealth and secrets. None of them knew yet. The tellers at their high counters didn't know. The ministry didn't know. Dumbledore, sitting somewhere behind his half-moon glasses and his lemon drops and his certainty that he had managed this situation, didn't know. By the end of the week, Ragnarok intended to make sure that would change. He pulled his legal notepad toward him and began to write the first document. It was a standard form, in structure, a notice of inheritance claim, the kind filed a dozen times a year at Gringotts. The language was formal, precise, governed by 8 centuries of magical contract law. But the name on the claiming line was Harry James Potter, and the attached schedule of claims ran to 4 pages, and when Ragnarok signed it in his capacity as senior inheritance specialist and sealed it with the Gringotts dragon stamp, something in the air of the office shifted, the particular charge of a very large thing beginning to move. Harry looked up from the heritage tape when the seal hit the document. His eyes met Ragnarok's. "Is that the start of it?" he asked. "That," Ragnarok said, "is the start of it." Harry looked back at the tape. "Good," he said, and turned the page. Chapter 2, 33 Crowns. The guest quarters in Gringotts were not designed with children in mind. They were designed with very wealthy, very paranoid clients in mind, clients who needed to conduct sensitive business over multiple days and couldn't risk being seen coming and going from the bank. The rooms were therefore secure, well appointed, and entirely without warmth. Stone walls. Dark furniture. Windows that looked out onto an interior courtyard rather than any street where someone might look up and see who was staying. Harry liked them immediately. He spent his first night in Gringotts sleeping in a bed that was 3 times the size of the cot he'd had at the Dursleys, under blankets that had been warmed by some enchantment he didn't recognize, and he slept for 11 hours without waking once. He didn't dream. Or if he did, he didn't remember them, which amounted to the same thing. He woke up to Griphook knocking on the door with breakfast, which Harry ate at the small desk while looking at the copy of the heritage tape Ragnarok had allowed him to keep. He'd read it 6 times already. He was going to read it a 7th. The names had stopped being abstract somewhere around the 4th reading. They were real now, real families, real histories, real legacies that had been quietly excised from his life before he was old enough to know they existed. The House of Peveril. The House of Gryffindor. The House of Slytherin. 23 others, some of them minor but none of them nothing, all of them his, all of them sitting somewhere in the legal architecture of Wizarding Britain with his name on them like a light under a door that someone had been very carefully blocking. He finished breakfast, folded the heritage tape, and went to find Ragnarok. The inheritance office looked like it had been busy since before dawn. There were 3 goblins Harry hadn't met yet arranged around the large central table, which was now covered in open ledgers, transaction records, and correspondence that appeared to have been retrieved from somewhere very deep in the vault archives. Some of it was dusty in a way that suggested it hadn't been touched in years. Ragnarok was standing at the head of the table, not sitting, in the posture of someone who had been on their feet for hours and intended to stay that way. He looked up when Harry came in. "You slept?" "Yes." Harry looked at the table. "How long have you been at this?" "Since 4. Ragnarok gestured him over. "Come. I want you to see what we've found." The 3 other goblins were introduced as Sharpclaw, Bonebreaker, and a very old goblin named Vaultkeeper Ironmaw, who was apparently so senior that his being in this room at all was, according to Griphook's whispered aside, essentially unprecedented. Ironmaw looked at Harry with the bright, measuring eyes of someone who has seen a great many things and is currently deciding which category this one falls into. "Sit," Ironmaw said. His voice was like gravel in a barrel. Harry sat. "You understand," Ironmaw said, "that what we are undertaking here is not simply an inheritance claim." "I know," Harry said. "What we have found in these records represents a deliberate, sustained conspiracy involving the head of the Wizengamot, at least 3 ministry officials, and 5 purchasing families who hold seats in the current wizarding government. When we move on this, and we will move, the entire political structure of magical Britain is going to experience a significant disruption." "Good," Harry said. Ironmaw looked at him for a moment. Then he made a sound that might, in a goblin, have been a laugh. "Continue, Ragnarok." Ragnarok had spent the night building a map. Not a physical map but a transaction map, a web of connections between vault movements, lordship filings, ministry records, and the specific dates on which various suppression layers had been applied to Harry's inheritance. He laid it out on the table with the precision of a surgeon presenting a diagnosis, moving between documents with the ease of someone who had been running the numbers all night and had them memorized. The timeline was damning. November 1st, 1981, the day after the Potters died. Dumbledore had placed Harry with the Dursleys without a guardianship hearing, without notifying the Wizengamot, and without, crucially, informing Gringotts that the Potter heir was being placed in non-magical custody. The first suppression layer had been applied within 72 hours of Harry's arrival at Privet Drive. The magical mechanism was sophisticated enough that it had registered in Gringotts' monitoring systems as background noise, which, Ragnarok explained with the restrained fury of someone who had been awake since 4 in the morning looking at the evidence, was not an accident. The suppression had been specifically calibrated to fall just below Gringotts' standard alert threshold. "Someone told him what the threshold was," Harry said. "Yes," Ragnarok said. "Someone inside the bank." He let that sit for a moment. "We've identified the source," Ironmaw said. The former Vault Master, Grabtooth, who retired in 1982 with a considerably larger personal vault balance than his salary would explain. "He is currently," the old goblin's expression was entirely flat, "being located." The first lordship transfer filing, Ragnarok continued, came 6 weeks after the suppression. The Potter Lordship, your father's seat, the most straightforward of the 26, was filed as abandoned and then transferred via the Ministry's Dormancy and Succession Office to a purchasing party. He found the document and set it on the table in front of Harry. House Greengrass. 250,000 galleons. Harry looked at the document. The signature on the transfer was small, cramped, and entirely recognizable even to someone who had never seen it before, because Ragnarok had shown him a reference copy the night before. Albus Dumbledore, signing as Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, with authority to authorize dormancy declarations. He used his Wizengamot position to declare my family's lordship dormant, Harry said. While I was alive. You were 1 year old and had no magical guardian on record, because he had arranged your placement without one. Under the dormancy laws as they existed in 1981, a lord's seat could be declared dormant if the heir was a minor with no registered guardian and no claim had been filed within 30 days. Ragnarok's voice was precise and utterly without softness. He wrote those laws, Harry. He was chief warlock for 40 years. He knew exactly what they said. The room was quiet except for the soft rustle of documents. And the others? Harry asked. They went through them. Not all 26 in a single morning, that would have taken a week, but the pattern. The method was the same across all of them, with minor variations. Suppress the core recognition. File a dormancy declaration through the ministry using Dumbledore's authority or the authority of officials who answered to him. Transfer the lordship to a purchasing party. The purchases varied. Some went to established noble families looking to expand their Wizengamot influence, some to newly wealthy families buying their way into hereditary nobility, one, the Peveril claim, to a private collector of magical artifacts and titles who didn't even sit in the Wizengamot and simply wanted the prestige. The prices ranged from 100,000 galleons for a minor entailed claim to 800,000 for the Slytherin lordship, which had been the crown jewel of the operation and which had been sold to a family called Knott in 1985, for years after Harry's parents died. 4,800,000 galleons total, Harry said, when the summary was complete. That's what I'm owed, at minimum. That is the face value of the transactions, Sharpclaw said. He was the youngest of the 3 senior goblins, and had the particular energy of someone who was very good at financial work and found this case professionally enraging. The actual restitution figure under the Inheritance Protection Act includes the value of the lordships themselves at current rates, the income generated by associated properties and vault interests during the period of suppression, legal penalties of 3 times the original transaction value for fraudulent inheritance transfer, and interest. He paused. The figure is closer to 19 million galleons. Harry looked at Sharpclaw for a moment. Make it 23, he said. Add what it would cost to properly feed, house, and educate a child for 6 years. Since we're being thorough. Sharpclaw blinked. Then he wrote it down. Ironmaw made the gravel in a barrel sound again. There's one more thing, Ragnarok said. He'd been saving it. Harry could tell from the way he'd moved around it during the whole morning presentation, referring to his notes near it and then veering away. Sit down properly, please. Harry was already sitting. He straightened anyway, because Ragnarok's tone was different. Your godfather, Ragnarok said. Sirius Black. Harry knew the name. He'd found it on the heritage tape, Sirius Orion Black, listed as a blood-sworn magical guardian. Which meant that the moment his parents died, the magical guardianship of Harry Potter should have passed automatically to Sirius Black, without any intervention required. He's in Azkaban, Harry said. For betraying my parents. Yes. Ragnarok set a document on the table. He has been there since November 1981. He was convicted of the murder of 12 Muggles and of passing the Potter's location to Voldemort. He paused. He never had a trial. The words landed in the room like stones dropped into deep water. He was sent to Azkaban, Ragnarok said carefully, by order of the Minister of Magic, without a hearing before the Wisengamot, without legal representation, and without the Veritaserum examination that wizarding law requires in all capital cases. The paperwork authorizing his imprisonment was signed by, he set another document on the table. The signature was the same cramped, recognizable hand. Harry looked at it for a long time. The quality of his stillness had changed, it was harder now, like something had set beneath the surface of him. If Sirius Black is innocent, Harry said, then I've been at the Dursleys for 6 years for no reason. Yes. And he's been in Azkaban for 6 years for no reason. That is what the evidence suggests, yes. Harry looked at the document with Dumbledore's signature. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked up at Ragnarok. Add that to the case. Whatever charge covers sending an innocent man to Azkaban to prevent him from claiming guardianship of an heir you're robbing. Add it. That charge, Ragnarok said, is unlawful imprisonment in furtherance of inheritance fraud. It carries a sentence of, he checked his notes. Life in Azkaban. Without possibility of release. Good, Harry said. Add it. He stood up, pushed back from the table, and walked to the window that looked out onto the interior courtyard. The courtyard had a stone fountain in it, some kind of magical creature carved into the basin. He stood with his hands at his sides and looked at it. Ragnarok watched him. The others watched him. He was 7 years old, standing at a window in Gringotts Bank, having just learned that the entirety of his life so far, the Dursleys, the cupboard under the stairs, the alley, all of it, had been a deliberate construction. Not neglect. Architecture. Designed to keep him small and ignorant and unprotected while someone systematically sold off everything his parents had left him. He stood there for about 30 seconds. Then he turned around. I need a guardian, he said. A legal, registered magical guardian. Someone Dumbledore can't touch or intimidate. Who is there? The goblins exchanged looks. It was Ironmaw who spoke. There is one possibility, the old goblin said. She is not an obvious choice. But she is legally connected to you through the Black family. Sirius is your godfather, which makes the Black family your secondary magical kin under the Guardianship Act. She is the only adult Black family member who has not been declared a Dark supporter or died. Who? Harry asked. Astria Black, Ragnarok said. She's 31. She was formally disowned from the Black family at 17 for refusing to take the Dark Mark and publicly supporting Muggle-born magical rights during the war. She's been living in Edinburgh for the past decade under her mother's maiden name. He paused. She is technically still on the Black family tapestry. The disownment was never properly completed because her mother died before the final ritual could be performed. Which means the secondary guardianship chain from Sirius to the wider Black family runs through her. Has she had any contact with Dumbledore? None. She's been entirely off the wizarding world's radar. She works as a, Ragnarok checked his notes, structural engineer. In the Muggle world. Harry looked at him. A structural engineer. Yes. Does she know any of this? About me? About what happened? We don't know what she knows, Ragnarok said. We haven't contacted her yet. Harry thought for a moment. Send her a letter. Not an owl, something official, on Gringotts stationery, so she knows it's not a trap. Tell her what we know. All of it. Tell her there's a 7-year-old who needs a guardian, that her family's been lied to, and that we can explain everything in person. He looked at Ragnarok. And tell her that Sirius is probably innocent. That last part will either bring her immediately or not at all, Ragnarok said. Yes, Harry said. That's why I want it in there. While Griphook was dispatched to compose the letter, Ragnarok guided Harry through the second phase of the morning's work, the practical inheritance claims. The Lordships were legal constructs, requiring formal acceptance at the ministry level, and those could wait. That battle would need to be fought publicly, with preparation. But the physical inheritance was different. The vaults, the properties, the liquid assets, those were Gringotts' domain, and Gringotts did not require ministry permission to transfer them to a confirmed heir. They rode the mine carts down together. Harry had never been on a mine cart before. He didn't flinch at the speed or the sudden drops or the darkness. He sat in the front of the cart with his hands on his knees and watched the vault levels flash by with the same attentive focus he applied to everything. Ragnarok watched him from the corner of his eye. The Potter family vault was Vault 687. The door was old bronze, not the gold-bright modern doors of newer vaults. The Potters had been banking at Gringotts since the 1200s and their vault was in the corresponding depth. When it opened, the light from inside was warm and steady, the kind of light that comes off a great deal of accumulated magic. Harry stood in the entrance and looked. The vault was large. Several rooms deep, with the casual abundance of an old family that had been wealthy for so long it had stopped thinking about it. Gold in the obvious stacks and bars of it, yes, but also jewelry, property documents, a glass-fronted cabinet of books that Ragnarok identified as having significant magical value, an armory section in the back with items that would require separate cataloging, and in a locked inner room, behind a door that opened specifically to Harry's touch, a collection of documents and personal items that had been James and Lily Potter's. Harry stood in the inner room for a few minutes, alone. Ragnarok waited outside. When he came out, he was carrying a small photograph and a journal with a leather cover. His face was as composed as always, but he put both items carefully into his jacket pocket, against his chest, and didn't say anything about them. They visited 2 more vaults, the ancestral Potter vault, even older and deeper, which had been locked under an entailment clause that the inheritance audit had now unlocked, and a 3rd vault that Ragnarok hadn't known about until the audit instruments uncovered it, a pre-Potter vault, centuries old, labeled simply with AP in the old gobbledygook script. It turned out to be the Peveril Vault. It was small but its contents were not, and when they catalogued it later, Sharpclaw had to sit down. In the Peveril Vault was a stone, smooth, dark, unimpressive looking, that the inventory documents identified as a resurrection stone. A wand case of pale wood containing nothing, but the wood itself radiating magic so deep it made the air around it hum. And a folded garment of shimmering cloth that moved when nobody touched it, like something living and patient. The Deathly Hallows, Harry said. He'd read enough of the heritage tape to know the Peveril name, and he'd read the mythology. He said it very quietly. 3 of them, Ragnarok confirmed, equally quiet. In your family's vault. Presumably placed here by an ancestor who wanted them secure. Harry looked at the invisibility cloak, because that was what the shimmering cloth was. The tape had been very clear about this. He looked at it the way he had looked at everything this morning, with total attention and no drama. We don't tell anyone these are here, he said. Agreed, Ragnarok said. Yet, Harry added. They were back upstairs by midday. The legal team had expanded, 3 more goblins from the contract law division had been brought in, and there was a general atmosphere in the inheritance office of controlled, purposeful urgency, the feeling of an institution that has decided it is going to do something significant and is building the machinery to do it properly. Astria Black arrived at 2:30. She came in through the main entrance of Gringotts, which meant she'd apparat to Diagon Alley and walked, which meant she'd gotten the letter mid-morning and made it from Edinburgh to London in approximately 4 hours, which told Harry something useful before she even appeared in the doorway of the inheritance office. She was tall for a witch, taller than most of the wizards Harry had seen coming and going through Gringotts' main hall. Black hair cut short and practical, the kind of haircut that says I cannot be bothered. Sharp features that were recognizably black family, the architecture of an old pure bloodline that apparently bred for cheekbones and a certain controlled intensity around the eyes. She was wearing muggle clothes, dark jeans, a grey jacket, work boots with steel toes, and she had a satchel over one shoulder and ink on her left hand and the look of someone who had dropped what she was doing the moment she finished reading and didn't stop moving until she got here. She looked at the room. The table covered in documents. The goblins. Ragnarok. Then her eyes found Harry, sitting at the table with the heritage tape and a cup of tea that Griphook had brought him. She looked at him for a long moment. You're James Potter's son, she said. It wasn't quite a question. Yes, Harry said. You're Sirius's cousin. She crossed the room, put her satchel on the table, and sat down across from him without being invited. The letter said Sirius is probably innocent. He never had a trial, Harry said. Dumbledore signed the imprisonment order. We have the document. Something moved across her face, not the soft collapse of someone getting terrible news, but the hard compression of someone who has suspected something for years and just had it confirmed. I knew it, she said, very quietly, to no one in particular. Then she looked at Ragnarok. Show me everything. Ragnarok showed her everything. She listened the way Harry had noticed people either did or didn't, actually listened, not waiting for a gap to speak, asking sharp questions when she needed clarification, writing notes on a small pad she produced from her satchel, cross-referencing things without being prompted. She was through the Dumbledore transaction documents in 20 minutes and had identified 2 angles of attack that the legal team hadn't prioritized yet, which Ragnarok noted with a very slight inclination of his head. The guardianship void, she said, pointing at one of the documents. If Sirius was never legally convicted, then his status as Harry's magical guardian was never legally suspended. Which means the guardianship order for the Dursleys was filed without a valid competing claim. Which means it's not just fraudulent, it's void ab initio. It never existed legally. Every action taken under it, she looked at Harry, every year you spent there, every suppression Dumbledore applied while operating as your de facto guardian, was done without legal authority. Harry looked at her. Can you use that? We can use that. She turned to Ragnarok. The void guardianship means Harry's been a ward of Gringotts from the moment he walked in here yesterday, under the bank's institutional emergency custody provision. Which means Dumbledore cannot file a counterclaim through the ministry without first proving the original guardianship was valid, which it wasn't. She set down her pen. He's trapped. If he tries to fight the inheritance claim legally, he has to defend the guardianship arrangement to do it. If he defends the guardianship arrangement, he has to explain why Sirius was imprisoned without trial. He won't fight it legally, Harry said. Everyone looked at him. He'll try something else, Harry said. He'll try to talk to me. He'll want to explain it. He'll want to sit down and tell me why he did it and why it was necessary and why I should understand, and Harry thought about it. He'll be very kind while he does it. He'll mean it. He'll think he can fix it with the right conversation. The room was quiet. You've never met him, Ragnarok said. No. But you said he's been Chief Warlock for 40 years and Supreme Mugwump for longer than that. And everything he's done has been very well thought out and very covered up and very careful. People like that don't panic when things go wrong. They adapt. Harry picked up his tea. So we need to move faster than he can adapt. Astria was looking at him with an expression that was somewhere between startled and deeply interested. How old are you? 7, Harry said. Almost 8. Right. She looked at Ragnarok. What's the first move? The first move, they agreed after an hour of discussion, was the formal inheritance declaration. Under the Gringotts Charter of 847, a document so old and so comprehensively negotiated that no subsequent wizarding government had ever managed to meaningfully revise it, the bank had the legal authority to publish an inheritance determination in the public record. This was normally a quiet administrative procedure. A notice in the Registry of Magical Inheritance, filed by correspondence, acknowledged by a ministry clerk, and forgotten within the week. They were going to use it. But they were going to use it in a way it had never been used before. We file all 26 claims simultaneously, Ragnarok said. Not one at a time. Not in private correspondence. We file the complete determination in the public registry, which means it appears in the Wisingamot record within 48 hours. He paused. By law, any sitting lord who holds a contested title must appear before the Wisingamot within 30 days to defend their claim. So 5 families get 30 days to panic, Astria said. 5 families and 1 former chief warlock, Ragnarok agreed. He's not former, Harry said. He's current. He still holds the position. For approximately 30 days, Ragnarok said. The Wisingamot cannot retain a chief warlock who is under active legal challenge in their own court. Once the filing is public, he will be required to step down from the position pending resolution. Harry looked at the table. At the documents. At the map of transactions that Ragnarok had drawn connecting Dumbledore's signature to 26 fraudulent transfers. At the imprisonment order for Sirius Black. At the heritage tape with his name on it in 33 places, 26 claimed, and 7 more that the instruments had flagged as potentially valid with further investigation. 33, he said, almost to himself. I beg your pardon. Ragnarok said. The heritage tape. It flagged 33 total lines, not 26. We've been focused on the 26 that were actively suppressed. But there are 7 more that are, what did you call them yesterday? Lying waiting. Ragnarok looked at the tape. Hereditas Jasons. Yes. Those are dormant claims that have never been filed with anyone. They weren't suppressed because they were never known about. They would require separate investigation to add them to the filing, Harry said. We can't file claims we haven't fully investigated. Then note them as under investigation and include the preliminary heritage evidence. I'd rather Dumbledore and the Wisingamot know there might be 33 than be surprised later. He looked at Ragnarok steadily. If I walk into that court with 26 and then later produce 7 more, it looks like I'm manufacturing claims. If I walk in with 33 and note that some are still being verified, it looks like I'm being comprehensive and honest, which is more threatening, because it means I'm not hiding anything. Astria made a sound that was almost a laugh. She turned to Ragnarok. He's right. He is frequently right, Ragnarok said, with the tone of someone who is still adjusting to this. Very well. 33. Astria, you'll need to formally file the secondary guardianship claim before we submit the inheritance declaration. Already drafted it on the way here, she said, producing a folded piece of paper from her satchel. She slid it across to him. I know your legal forms. My mother was very thorough about making sure I understood how all of this worked, even when she was pretending she wasn't teaching me wizarding law. She said it lightly, but Harry caught the edge in it. A mother who prepared her daughter for a world while pretending not to. He knew something about that kind of hidden preparation. While the legal team processed Astria's guardianship filing, she and Harry were left alone at one end of the table. She looked at him for a moment, then out the window, then back at him. I want to be honest with you, she said. I haven't been in the wizarding world for 10 years. I left because I couldn't stand it, the way it works, the way old families think they own everything, the way people like Dumbledore are treated like they're above questioning. She paused. I'm telling you this because you should know who you're taking on as a guardian. I'm not a ministry insider. I don't have connections. What I have is a very good memory for wizarding law, considerable spite, and the fact that I'm technically still on the Black family tapestry, which means I have legal standing. That's more than I had yesterday, Harry said. She nodded. I'm also going to ask you something I probably shouldn't. Ask. Are you actually alright? Not legally, I don't mean the inheritance. I mean, she looked at him, and her voice dropped half a register, losing the precise professional edge. You were in an alley. For 2 days. Harry looked at her steadily. I left because staying was worse. The alley was fine. It wasn't fine. No, he agreed. But I was managing. She held his gaze for a moment. Then, I grew up in a house where nobody was allowed to say when things weren't fine. I won't do that to you. But I'm also not going to make a production of it. Good, Harry said. So just, if it's not fine, at some point, you can say so. You too, Harry said. She blinked. Then something in her face settled into something softer than the professional precision she'd been operating at all afternoon. Yeah, she said. All right. Griphook appeared in the doorway with an expression that combined professional excitement with visible nervousness. The guardianship filing has been processed. And, he looked at Ragnarok, Dumbledore has sent an owl to the bank. A personal communication to the director, requesting a meeting. Everyone at the table was very still. How did he know Harry was here? Astria said. It's been less than 30 hours. He has informants in Diagon Alley, Ragnarok said. He has informants everywhere. He would have noticed the moment Harry stopped being at Privet Drive. He's been monitoring the wards on that house. He looked at the message Griphook was holding. What does it say? Griphook read it. He says he understands a young person has come into the bank's custody and he would like to arrange a meeting at his earliest convenience to discuss the situation, as he is the boy's, Griphook hesitated, guardian and responsible party. Harry looked at Ragnarok. Ragnarok looked at Harry. Right back, Harry said. Tell him that the boy's guardian has been confirmed as Astria Black by Gringotts Emergency Custody Protocol, that any further communication from him should be directed to the bank's legal department, and that his claim of guardianship will be reviewed in the context of the ongoing inheritance investigation. He paused. Make it very polite. Ragnarok smiled. It was a small, sharp smile, the kind that didn't involve any warmth at all and was more interesting for it. Griphook, he said, prepare a response. Exactly as Mr. Potter said, Astria added. The formal language. All of it. That evening, after the legal team had finally departed and the documents had been secured and Astria had been shown to her own guest room down the hall from Harry's, Ragnarok sat alone in the inheritance office with the heritage tape rolled out in front of him. He wasn't reading it, he had the relevant sections memorized by now. He was looking at it the way you look at something when you're trying to understand its full shape. 33 lines. 33 crowns, as the old inheritance documents called Lordship claims, a reference to the coronets that medieval magical lords had worn as physical manifestations of their authority. 26 stolen. 7 lying quiet. All of them running down to a single point, a single name, a single boy who had been sitting in an alley 2 days ago with a cracked pair of glasses and a pillowcase full of books. He thought about how this was going to go. He had a precise, trained mind and 2 centuries of experience, and when he laid out the probable sequence of events, most of them were going to be very difficult and some of them were going to be extremely dangerous, because people who stood to lose this much power did not lose it quietly. He also thought about Harry's face when he had said, "I want all of it back." Not with rage. Not with tears. With the flat, absolute certainty of someone stating a fact about the physical world. Ragnarok rolled up the heritage tape, tucked it into the secure case, and went to file the preliminary inheritance declaration, the 26 confirmed claims and the 7 under investigation, 33 total, with every supporting document they had assembled, signed with the Gringotts dragon stamp, dated that evening, and marked for immediate processing. By morning, it would be in the public registry. By the following morning, it would be in the Wisengamot record. By the morning after that, every lord in Britain who held a title they'd purchased from Albus Dumbledore would know that Harry Potter was coming. He sealed the filing, handed it to the night courier, and walked back to the inheritance office. Through the wall, he could hear, very faintly, the sound of Harry still awake, pages turning. Still reading. Still learning the shape of everything that was his. He thought about the owl that was on its way to Hogwarts right now. He thought about Albus Dumbledore reading it, in his office with its twinkling instruments and its lemon drops, and understanding for the first time that the situation he had carefully managed for 6 years had just changed completely. And he thought, again, about the expression that was going to be on that man's face. Good, he thought, and went to make tea. Chapter 3, The Court of Stolen Names. The Wisengamot chamber was older than most of the wizarding families who sat in it. The stone was pre-medieval, the vaulted ceiling lost in shadow even at midday, the tiered seating arranged in a horseshoe around a central floor where the accused or the presenting party stood alone, a design that was very deliberately meant to communicate the weight of the institution pressing down on the individual at its center. Harry walked into it on a Tuesday morning wearing robes that Ragnarok had commissioned overnight from a Goblin tailor, deep green with silver trim, no house markings because they hadn't decided yet which house crest to display, and wearing all 26 would have been excessive. The robes fit perfectly. He'd looked at himself in the mirror that morning for approximately 3 seconds and then looked away, because how he appeared was not the point. Astria walked on his left. Ragnarok walked on his right. Behind them came Sharpclaw and a wizard solicitor named Phineas Webb, who was one of 3 people in Britain who specialized in hereditary magical law and who had, when Ragnarok explained the case to him the previous afternoon, gone very still and then asked how quickly they needed him. They had been given the Tuesday morning session by the acting chief warlock. Dumbledore had, as predicted, been required to step down from the position when the filing hit the Wisengamot record Monday morning. The acting chief warlock was an elderly witch named Millicent Bagnold, who had been Minister for Magic during the war and who had retired to a Wisengamot seat and clearly not expected to be doing anything significant with it. She had the look of someone who had been handed a very complicated problem before she'd finished her morning tea. The chamber filled quickly. It was always full for significant sessions, and the notice of Harry Potter's inheritance claim had gone through the wizarding world on Monday like a stone through glass. Every seat in the upper tiers was occupied. There were people standing along the walls. The press gallery, a railed section to the left, where several reporters from the Daily Prophet and 2 from smaller publications were already scribbling, was at capacity. Harry noticed all of this and filed it away and focused on the floor. The 5 families who had purchased stolen lordships were already present. He knew their faces from the briefing documents Ragnarok had prepared, photographs pulled from ministry records and newspaper archives. Lord Greengrass, who had the Potter lordship, was a heavy-set man with the careful blankness of someone who had rehearsed not reacting. Lord Knott, who held Slytherin, was thin and pale and watching Harry with an expression that was trying very hard to be contempt and not quite managing it. A witch named Lady Rosier had the Peveril claim. She was older, perhaps 60, and meeting Harry's gaze with the specific steadiness of someone who has decided their best strategy is absolute composure. Lords Selwyn and Flint held the remaining two significant claims, both of them in conversation with their legal representatives, neither of them looking at Harry directly. Dumbledore was in the third tier, fourth seat from the left. He was not in his Wizengamot robes, he had dressed in his usual sweeping purple, as if attending a meeting he considered informal, which was either calculated or denial, and Harry suspected it was both. His half-moon glasses caught the light from the wall torches. His expression was, Harry had been right. He didn't look panicked. He looked grave and thoughtful and a little sad, like a man who sees a situation developing that he knows he should have handled differently and is already composing the explanation. Harry looked at him for exactly long enough to register all of this, then looked away. Acting Chief Warlock Bagnold called the session to order with a strike of the ceremonial gavel, and the chamber quieted with the rumbling reluctance of a crowd that would very much prefer to keep talking. This session of the Wizengamot has been convened, Bagnold said, in the voice of someone who has decided to be professionally adequate to a situation even if personally overwhelmed by it, to hear the preliminary presentation of the inheritance claim filed by Gringotts Bank on behalf of Harry James Potter, in the matter of the houses Potter, Peveril, Gryffindor, Slytherin, and 22 additional named houses. She looked at her notes. The full list of claimed houses is entered into the Wizengamot record as Appendix A. Gringotts Bank has legal standing to present this matter under the Inheritance Protection Act of 879 and the Charter of 847. The floor is given to Senior Inheritance Specialist Ragnock Stonefist. Ragnock stepped forward. He was carrying a case, the secure case with all the documentation, the transaction records, the vault access logs, the suppression instrument readings, the lordship transfer filings, the signed documents. He set it on the presenting table and opened it with the deliberate unhurried movements of a professional who knows he has all the time he needs and all the evidence he needs and is going to take as long as is necessary to deploy both. He began to speak. Ragnock was not a dramatic speaker. He was a precise one, which was more devastating. He walked the Wizengamot through the inheritance determination with the same methodical clarity he'd used in the office, the bloodline evidence first, the core signature confirmation, the identification of the 26 suppression layers. He displayed the instrument readings on an enlarged chart that he'd had prepared overnight, each suppression signature marked and dated. He was 15 minutes in before he produced the first transaction document. The chamber had been murmuring during the bloodline portion. When Ragnock laid the first transaction document on the displaying stone, an enchanted surface that projected documents to all tiers simultaneously, the murmuring stopped. It was the Potter Lordship transfer. Dumbledore's signature at the bottom. The date. The purchasing party, House Greengrass, and the price. Harry watched the chamber. He watched Lord Greengrass in particular, and saw the man's jaw tighten by a small, controlled degree. He watched the press gallery, where 3 quills had just accelerated significantly. This transfer, Ragnock said, was filed under the dormancy and succession provision of the Wizengamot Lordship Act of 1843, citing the minor heir's lack of a registered magical guardian. The dormancy declaration required the signature of the Chief Warlock. He paused. The Chief Warlock who signed this declaration was also the individual who arranged the minor heir's placement in non-magical custody without a guardianship hearing, thereby creating the precise legal condition the declaration cited as justification. The chamber absorbed this. He created the loophole, said a witch in the second tier, loudly enough to carry, and then used it. Bagnold struck the gavel. Comments from the floor will be reserved for the question period. Ragnock continued. He was 40 minutes in when he reached the suppression evidence, and he presented it with the same level-voiced precision, showing the instrument readings, explaining what each suppression layer had done, walking through the specific magical mechanism that had been used to keep Harry's core from recognizing its own inheritance. He was scrupulously technical about it. He did not use inflammatory language. He did not need to. When he produced the imprisonment order for Sirius Black, the chamber didn't murmur. It went completely silent. He set it on the displaying stone. Dumbledore's signature. The date. By authority of the chief warlock of the Wisengamot and in the interests of public safety, the standard language for emergency imprisonment orders, language designed for use when a Death Eater was actively dangerous and there wasn't time for a proper hearing. Sirius Black had been sitting in a cell at Privet Drive, crying, according to the neighbor testimony that Ragnarok had managed to obtain through the Muggle authorities, because Gringotts had Muggle contacts, which was another thing wizards underestimated. He'd been screaming. He'd been taken in his pajamas and thrown in a cart and sent to Azkaban within 24 hours, and the man who'd signed the order to do it had then gone to put a 1-year-old in a cupboard under some stairs and declared his family's lordship dormant. The silence in the chamber stretched. Then several people started talking at once. Bagnall's gavel struck 3 times before the noise reduced to something manageable. Order. Order. She looked at Ragnarok. Specialist Stonefist, is it Gringotts' position that the imprisonment of Sirius Black was directly related to the inheritance fraud? It is Gringotts' position, Ragnarok said, that the removal of the legal magical guardian of the Potter heir was a necessary precondition for the fraudulent lordship transfers that followed, and that the imprisonment of that guardian without trial was the mechanism of that removal. Yes. The chamber was loud again immediately. Bagnall was gaveling. Harry stood very still in the center of the floor and waited. I would like, said a voice from the 3rd tier, calm and deep and carrying without effort through the noise, to be permitted to address the chamber. Everyone went quiet. Because it was Dumbledore, and when Dumbledore spoke in that particular register, decades of authority and credibility and carefully cultivated trust made the room obey before it remembered that it had a choice about whether to. Bagnall looked uncomfortable. This is a presentation session, not a debate. The floor belongs to the presenting party. Of course, Dumbledore said, inclining his head. I merely wondered if the chamber would benefit from context before drawing conclusions. These are extremely serious allegations and I would not want anyone to act on incomplete information. Harry turned and looked at him. Dumbledore looked back. His expression was exactly what Harry had predicted, grave, kind, a little sad. The expression of a man who has made difficult choices for what he believes were good reasons and is prepared to explain them. Up in the 3rd tier, with the torchlight catching his silver hair and the half-moon glasses and the careful gravity of his posture, he looked like exactly what he'd spent 40 years building himself into. The wise one. The protector. The man who had held the darkness back. Harry looked at him for 3 seconds. Then he turned back to the chamber. Ragnarok, he said. Ragnarok looked at him. Show them the last one, Harry said. Ragnarok reached into the secure case and produced a document that they had held back deliberately, not the most legally significant document, but the one that the legal team had agreed, after some discussion, was the most clarifying. It was a private vault transaction record from Gringotts' own archives, showing a transfer of 600,000 galleons from a discretionary fund registered to Albus Dumbledore into a series of subaccounts. The subaccounts had then been used to fund, among other things, the operating costs of the Order of the Phoenix, a private paramilitary organization that Dumbledore had run during the war, and, less visibly, a series of educational bursaries attached to Dumbledore's name that had generated considerable good press over the years. He had used some of the money from selling Harry's family's titles to fund his own public image. Context, Harry said, into the renewed silence, is welcome. He didn't say it loudly. He didn't perform it. He just said it, in the carrying quiet of a chamber that was currently very attentive to everything coming from the floor, and let the document on the displaying stone do the rest. The press gallery was writing with the focused intensity of people who know they are present for a story that is going to define their careers. Dumbledore looked at the document. Something moved behind his eyes, not guilt, not exactly. More like the expression of a chess player who has just watched their opponent reveal a combination they hadn't seen coming. He was recalculating. Harry watched it happen and filed it away. The presenting party will continue, Bagnall said, in a voice that had found some additional authority from somewhere. Ragnarok continued for another 20 minutes, completing the presentation with the summary of financial damages claimed and the legal remedies being sought, return of all lordship claims, restitution of funds plus penalties plus interest, review of all associated ministry approvals, immediate reopening of the Sirius Black case, and formal investigation of the ministry officials who had processed the fraudulent transfers. Then he said, "At this time, the claiming party would like to make a brief statement." Bagnold looked at Harry. The chamber looked at Harry. He stepped forward, alone in the center of the floor, and felt the full weight of the horseshoe of seats pressing down from all sides, all those faces, all that accumulated institutional authority, trying to make him feel small. He'd been made to feel small in a cupboard under the stairs. This was not the same. "My name is Harry James Potter," he said. His voice carried easily, the chamber was built for it. "I'm 7 years old. Yesterday I was living in Gringotts guest quarters because 3 days ago I was in an alley because there was nowhere safer to be." He paused. "I'm not here to tell you that's sad. I'm here to tell you what caused it, and you've just heard that presentation in detail. I have 26 lordship claims that were taken from me before I was old enough to speak. I have a godfather in Azkaban who was never tried. I have a magical core that was bound and rebound 6 times over 7 years to keep me from knowing any of this." He looked around the chamber. Not at Dumbledore. Around at everyone else. "I'm going to get all of it back. I'm going to do it legally, through this court, with Gringotts' assistance. I would prefer that the Wisengamot cooperate with that process. I'm informing you that I intend to pursue it regardless." He looked at Bagnold. "I'm told there's a question period." Bagnold, who appeared to have forgotten she was the one who was supposed to be in charge of proceedings, pulled herself together. "Yes. The floor is open for questions directed to the presenting party." The questions came fast. Most of them were from members Harry had been briefed on, the moderate wing, the undecided, the ones who had no particular stake in the outcome and were genuinely trying to understand the scope of what they'd just heard. He answered them directly. Yes, the suppression instruments were independently verified by 2 Gringotts specialists plus Phineas Webb. Yes, the vault transaction records were original documents, not copies. Yes, Sirius Black's imprisonment order had been cross-referenced against the Wisengamot's own emergency powers records and it was not in compliance with the 3-judge sign-off requirement that those powers required. 3 sign-offs. Dumbledore had signed it alone. A wizard in the upper tier named Ogden asked, "The young man claims 26 lordships. Can he actually exercise them? He's a minor." Under the Hereditary Lordship Act of 1402, Phineas Webb said, from his position beside the presenting table, a minor lord may not vote his seat or conduct Wisengamot business in person until the age of 14, but the lordship itself is valid and the associated properties and assets are administered by the registered guardian. The seats are held in trust. They cannot be voted by anyone else. He paused. Which means that if these claims are upheld, approximately 30% of the current Wisengamot-seated lords will need to vacate titles they hold, and those seats will become inactive pending Harry Potter's 14th birthday. The chamber understood the implication immediately, because chambers of law always understand the implication of a power shift. 30% of seated lords. The balance of the Wisengamot would change entirely. Every alliance, every voting bloc, every policy that had been carried in the last 7 years by slim majorities, all of it was suddenly contingent. The noise was considerable. "The context I offered to provide," Dumbledore said, "above the noise, still calm, is simply this. He had stood. Not to be recognized, he hadn't waited for recognition. He was simply standing, and the chamber was quieting for him the way it always did. When Voldemort fell, Harry Potter was the center of a prophecy that many in this chamber are aware of. Voldemort was gone but not destroyed. I made the decision to protect Harry in the way that I believed best shielded him from those who would seek to use him, or harm him, before he was ready to protect himself. The choices I made were not made for personal gain." He looked at Harry. The kindness in his expression was genuine. That was the difficult part. They were made because I believed a child's safety required it. The chamber was listening. Some of them were nodding slightly, the long habit of trusting this voice working on them even now. Harry looked at Dumbledore. "The money went into your accounts," he said. "The administrative management of those funds, 600,000 galleons," Harry said. "Across 9 transactions. Into accounts with your name on them. You can explain the reasoning behind the guardianship arrangement. You can explain the suppression work. Those are arguments about judgment, and people can disagree about judgment." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "But the money is not a judgment call." The nodding had stopped. "I'd like those 9 transactions explained as well," said a witch in the second tier named Augusta Longbottom, who had said nothing until now and had a voice like a blade being drawn. "Separately from the question of protection. Separately from the prophecy. Just the 9 transactions." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I would welcome a full investigation." "You'll have one," Bagnold said. She seemed to have found the additional authority again. She turned to the chamber. "Given the scope of the allegations and the documentary evidence presented this morning, I am ordering a formal investigation committee to be assembled under the authority of this body. The committee will review all transaction records, lordship transfer filings, and the imprisonment record of Sirius Black. Pending the investigation, the lordship claims under active contest," she named the 5 purchasing families, "are suspended. The associated titles cannot be exercised or voted until the committee delivers its findings." Lord Knott was on his feet. "You cannot simply suspend. The Gringotts Charter of 847 supersedes lordship exercise rights in cases of documented fraud, Lord Knott. The suspension is automatic upon valid claim, not subject to the Wisengamot's discretion." Bagnold looked at him over her reading spectacles with the expression of someone who has been underestimated once this morning and is not planning to allow it twice. "Sit down." Knott sat. "One additional matter," Bagnold said, consulting her notes. "The matter of Sirius Black's imprisonment. Given the evidence that the emergency order was signed without the required 3-judge authorization, I am," she paused, and Harry could see her deciding something in real time, referring this to the improper use of emergency powers subcommittee for immediate review with a recommendation that a full hearing be scheduled within 30 days. She looked at the chamber. "This session is adjourned. The investigation committee will be convened within the week." The gavel came down. The chamber exploded. Harry stood in the center of the floor while the noise washed over him and felt something he hadn't had language for before. Not satisfaction, exactly. More like the sensation of a door that has been locked for a very long time clicking open, the recognition of a mechanism working the way it was supposed to work, finally, because someone had brought the right key. Astrea appeared at his elbow. She bent slightly to speak close to his ear. "You did well." "Bagnold did well," Harry said. "She did because you gave her the reason to." She straightened. "Dumbledore's going to want to talk to you now. His people are already moving toward us." Harry looked. She was right, 2 wizards from the middle tiers were working their way down toward the floor, one of them the deputy chief warlock and the other a man Harry recognized from the briefing documents as Elphias Doge, Dumbledore's oldest friend. They had the careful expressions of people who have been sent to request a conversation. "Tell them," Harry said to Astrea, "that any communication from Albus Dumbledore should be directed to Ragnarok or Phineas. That I'm not available for a private meeting. That if he wants to speak to me, he's welcome to do it in session, with a stenographer, and with both legal teams present." Astrea looked at him. "He's not going to like that." "Good," Harry said, and walked toward Ragnarok, leaving Astrea to intercept the approaching wizards with the specific expression of someone who has been waiting a long time to tell certain people certain things. The corridor outside the Wisengamot chamber was high-ceilinged and cool, ministry stone underfoot, the kind of government corridor that has been walked by thousands of people who had business there and thousands more who were pretending they did. The press had positioned themselves in a loose semicircle near the exit and Harry navigated through them with Ragnarok on one side and Phineas on the other and the phrase "no comment at this time," a written statement will be available through Gringotts deployed 6 times in 40 seconds. Except for one reporter. A woman in her mid-twenties, notepad out, who didn't try to push through the others or shout a question. She just stood slightly to the side, and when Harry passed she said, quietly, "Rita Skeeter, Daily Prophet. I've been following the Vault anomaly reports for 3 months. If you want your story told accurately, I'd like to do that." Harry stopped. Ragnarok made a fractional noise of caution. Harry looked at the woman, her quick eyes, the notepad already open, the specific alertness of a reporter who has been following a story that nobody else knew was a story. 3 months, he said. The Vault irregularity reports. They show up in the ministry's financial oversight filings if you know what you're looking at, which most people don't. She met his gaze steadily. I knew something was wrong. I didn't know it was this. Send your questions to Gringotts in writing, Harry said. If your reporting has been accurate, you'll get answers. If it hasn't, you'll get corrections. He paused. I'm told you sometimes, embellish. Something moved through her expression, a flicker of something real underneath the professional composure. I sometimes give people what they want to read, she said. This story doesn't need embellishment. No, Harry agreed. It doesn't. He walked on. The ministry atrium was full of the specific variety of controlled chaos that follows a significant Wizengamot session, people moving quickly, conversations happening in clusters, the fireplaces along the far wall lighting and darkening in rapid succession as people flood out with news. Harry moved through it, letting the noise wash over him, cataloging what he was hearing in fragments. Can they actually validate 26 claims, Black in Azkaban without a trial? If that's true, then Crouch has to answer. Not will fight it, he's not going to just hand over the Dumbledore's done, surely. How does he come back from? Harry stored all of it. He was building a picture, not of this single session but of the shape of the conflict ahead. The Wizengamot investigation was going to be slow. Committees were always slow, because their slowness served the people who needed time to cover things. Bagnold had surprised him by being more decisive than he'd expected, but she was acting in a caretaker capacity and didn't have Dumbledore's coalition to rely on, which meant every decision she made was fragile. He needed something that wasn't fragile. Outside the ministry, on the pavement above, the world was a grey London afternoon. Traffic. Office workers. Nobody looking twice at a small boy in green robes standing outside a phone box. Ragnarok had already called the transit port key. They had 10 minutes. The investigation committee, Harry said to Ragnarok. Who's on it? Not yet decided. Who should be on it? Ragnarok thought. Augusta Longbottom would be fair. Amelia Bones from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement would be better. She's a stickler for procedure, which means she'll follow the evidence wherever it goes. Theodore Greengrass, he stopped. No. Too conflicted. Bones, Harry said. How do we make sure she's on it? We request it formally. Gringotts has the right to nominate a committee member under the charter. We nominate Bones. Ragnarok looked at him. She's not friendly to Gringotts historically. She's independent, which means she's not friendly to anyone. That's fine, Harry said. I don't need friends on the committee. I need people who will follow the evidence. Astria rejoined them, slightly flushed, with the expression of someone who has just delivered several messages that needed delivering. Dumbledore's people were polite about it, she reported. He got the message. He's not happy. What's he going to do? Harry asked. Doge said, and I quote, she produced her notepad, that the headmaster hoped there would be an opportunity to speak with Harry before the situation escalated further, and that he had information relevant to Harry's safety that he believed was important to share. Harry looked at Ragnarok. Ragnarok looked at Harry. The prophecy, Harry said. Most likely, Ragnarok agreed. He's going to use it as leverage. He's going to tell me that I need him, that there's a threat I don't understand and he's the only one who knows how to manage it, and that's why he made the choices he did. Harry thought about this for a moment. How much do we know about the prophecy? Very little. It was made in Dumbledore's presence at the Hog's Head Inn. The Department of Mysteries holds the record. We can't access it without authorization from. Ragnarok paused. Actually, under your Slytherin Lordship claim, you may have access rights to the Hall of Prophecy that the Department of Mysteries would have difficulty refusing. The Slytherin Lordship carries several ancient ministry access privileges that have never been revoked because nobody has held the claim for a generation. Harry absorbed this. Put it on the list. The portkey activated and pulled them back toward Gringotts, back toward the warm, precise, quietly radical safety of stone walls and inheritance records and the ongoing project of taking apart a conspiracy one document at a time. That evening, Astria spread a large piece of parchment on the table in the guest suite, the room Harry had been using as an informal office since his belongings had been consolidated there, and they worked through the next phase together. Not the Wizengamot process, which was Ragnarok and Phineas's domain. The other process. The reclamation. The 5 families, Astria said, listing them. Greengrass, Knot, Rosier, Selwyn, Flint. The Wizengamot Committee will handle the formal claim, but these families are going to fight. Some of them knew exactly what they were buying. Some of them may genuinely have believed the transfers were legitimate. She looked at Harry. We should know which before we treat them all the same way. Greengrass knew, Harry said. He was in the chamber when Dumbledore signed the Potter Lordship. He's been in the Wizengamot for 30 years. He knows what dormancy declaration language looks like and he knows what it doesn't look like. Rosier's older, Astria said. She bought Peveril in 1987. By then the pattern was established. But the Rosier family has old connections to Gringotts, they were banking here before the current management. Is there any sign she queried the provenance? Ragnarok, who had joined them for the evening session, flipped through his records. There is a query letter on file. She asked a single question about the transfer's validity through an intermediary in 1988. And Gringotts responded. The intermediary response, signed by Grabtooth, the corrupt vault master, confirmed validity. So she asked, Harry said. She got a fraudulent answer and accepted it. He considered. She's different from Greengrass. Different how? Astria asked. Greengrass didn't need to ask. He knew. Rosier asked because she wasn't sure, she had doubt, she investigated at a shallow level, she got an answer she wanted to believe and she believed it. Harry looked at the parchment. Those are 2 different levels of culpability. You're thinking about who might cooperate, Astria said. I'm thinking that going to war with 5 families simultaneously is inefficient if one of them is willing to acknowledge the transfer was fraudulent in exchange for a clean exit. He paused. What does Rosier have besides the Peveril claim? They went through it. Lady Rosier, Cordelia Rosier, Astria knew her slightly, old family, had kept her head down during the war by being in France and had never been investigated for Death Eater connections, held the Peveril claim, a secondary property in Wales that came with it, and a seat on 3 different wizarding charitable boards. She was not a political player. She was a collector who had bought a distinguished name and enjoyed the prestige of it. Write to her, Harry said. Before the committee convenes. Not threatening, informational. Let her know we have the full provenance documentation, that the committee will find what we found, and that a family who acknowledges the situation before the committee's findings are published will be treated differently than one who waits to be forced. Give her 2 weeks. Astria made a note. And if she doesn't respond? Then she's had 2 weeks to prepare for what's coming and made a choice. That's fair enough. Astria looked at him for a moment. You know you're 7 years old, right? I'm aware, Harry said. I'm not criticizing, she made a gesture. Most adults I know who have just spent a day in the Wizengamot presenting a case against one of the most powerful men in Britain would be in bed with a headache. Do you have a headache? Harry asked. Spectacular one. There's headache potion in the supply case Ragnarok brought up. Harry returned to the parchment. The knot approach is going to be different. He's not going to cooperate and he's going to fight loudly. We should expect a counterfiling. They worked for another 2 hours. By the time Astria called it and went to bed, they had individual strategies for all 5 families, a list of questions for Amelia Bones that Ragnak was going to use to support the committee nomination, a draft request for Hall of Prophecy access under the Slytherin claim, and a letter to the head of the committee for the disposal of dangerous creatures, which Harry had included because the creature inheritance that had been unbound from his core was becoming more interesting, and he wanted to know exactly what it was before someone else named it for him. Ragnak stayed after Astria left. He gathered his papers methodically, as he always did, and then paused at the door. "You held yourself well today," he said. The chamber was, not what anyone expected. Harry looked up from the parchment. What did they expect? They expected a traumatized child. Someone they could feel sorry for and then manage. Ragnak considered. What they got was a claimant. Harry thought about that. Is that better or worse for us? Better, Ragnak said. You can pity someone and then set them aside. It's harder to set aside someone who is clearly not waiting for your permission to proceed. After Ragnak left, Harry sat alone in the room for a while with the parchment and the residual hum of everything that had happened since Tuesday. 5 days since the alley. 5 days since Ragnak's rod had gone haywire over a cracked pair of glasses and a pillowcase full of books. He thought about Dumbledore's face in the chamber. The recalculation behind the half-moon glasses. The man was brilliant, Harry understood that. You didn't construct and maintain a deception of this scope and duration without being brilliant. And brilliant people who were cornered didn't give up. They pivoted. They found new angles. They used what they still had. What did Dumbledore still have? He had the prophecy, or the threat of it. He had decades of accumulated trust and relationships in both the Wizengamot and the broader wizarding world. He had the position of headmaster of Hogwarts, which was technically unrelated to the Wizengamot proceedings and therefore untouchable for now. He had allies who hadn't been implicated in the fraud, people who genuinely believed in him, who would advocate for him, who would not be immediately moved by the transaction documents. And he had time. The committee was slow by nature and he knew it. Harry reached into his jacket pocket and took out the small photograph he'd retrieved from the inner room of the Potter vault. It was moving, magical photographs always moved, and it showed 2 people. A woman with red hair and green eyes and a laugh that the photograph kept catching her midway through, so that she was perpetually on the edge of something delightful. A man with glasses and dark hair and the specific expression of someone who knows exactly how lucky he is and finds it slightly incredible. His parents. James and Lily Potter. Before everything. He looked at it for a moment. Then he put it carefully back in his pocket and returned to work. Tomorrow there would be more. There was always more. But today, for the first time in Harry Potter's short and difficult life, the balance of things had shifted, and the weight that had been pressing down on him from every side had, in the high-ceilinged stone chamber of the oldest court in Wizarding Britain, been named. Documented. Filed into the record. A thing that has been named can be fought. He picked up his quill and kept writing. Chapter 4, Fire in the Old Houses. The letter from Cordelia Rosier arrived on a Friday morning, 9 days after Harry had sent his. It was written on heavy cream parchment in the careful, slightly old-fashioned hand of someone who had learned correspondence as a formal discipline. It was also, Harry noticed when he read it at the breakfast table, precisely 3 paragraphs long, which was exactly the length of someone who had decided to say something difficult and was refusing to waste words doing it. The first paragraph acknowledged receipt of Harry's communication and confirmed she had reviewed the documentation provided. The second paragraph stated that upon review, she could not in good conscience contest the provenance evidence, and that she wished to discuss terms of a voluntary return of the Peveril claim. The third paragraph said, I would like to meet in person, at a neutral location, with appropriate legal representation present on both sides. I am not your enemy, Mr. Potter. I may have been your unwitting obstacle, which I accept as a different thing and one I am prepared to address. Harry read it twice. Then he passed it to Astria, who read it once and set it down. Unwitting, she said. She asked about provenance in 1988, Harry said. She got a fraudulent answer. I think she believed it, but I also think she was relieved to believe it, which isn't the same as being innocent. He picked up his tea. But she's the first one to come to us rather than wait for a committee to force her. That's worth something. Worth what, exactly? Worth not making an example of her. He looked at the letter again. The Peveril properties, what's associated with the claim? Astria had the property schedule memorized by now, they all did. The Welsh estate, Caer Peveril, outside Brecon. About 40 acres of warded land, the manor house, and a secondary tower that the original documents describe as a research facility. All of it's been maintained, according to the Magical Property Registry. Rosier's been using it as a summer residence. She's been living in it. Part of it. Harry thought about this. Caer Peveril was his by blood, by the heritage tape, by every instrument that Ragnarok had run. He also hadn't known it existed 3 weeks ago, and Cordelia Rosier had been maintaining it for 7 years. We meet with her, he said. Next week. Ragnarok and Phineas on our side, her legal representative on hers. Draft the response today. The meeting was set for Tuesday at a solicitor's office in Diagon Alley, neutral, professional, the kind of space that imposed a certain civility simply by being full of mahogany and contract law. Cordelia Rosier turned out to be exactly what her letter had suggested, a woman in her 60s with the careful composure of old money, who had spent her life making correct choices and had made, in 1987, one that had turned out to be wrong in a way she was choosing to address directly rather than dishonestly. She looked at Harry across the conference table and said, without preamble, I want to tell you that I queried the transfer. I know, Harry said. Ragnarok has the query on file. She absorbed this without surprise. Then you know I was given a fraudulent confirmation. Yes. I should have done more, she said. I knew the Peveril line had been considered extinct for centuries. Something that old coming available through a dormancy declaration should have prompted deeper questions. I chose to accept the answer I was given. She looked at him directly, the way people only do when they've decided they owe it. I don't have a defense for that. I have an explanation, which I'm not offering as a substitute. Harry looked at her for a moment. What's the explanation? I had spent 15 years collecting the history of the ancient houses. Not for power, the Peveril seat carried no Wisengamot position. I wanted the historical record. The library at Caer Peveril. She paused. That's not adequate. No, Harry agreed. But it's human. He looked at Ragnarok. The terms. They'd prepared the terms. The voluntary return of the Peveril claim, clear and uncontested, effective immediately upon signing. The Welsh property, Caer Peveril itself, transferred back to the Potter estate. In exchange, no requirement for Rosier to testify against Dumbledore in the committee proceedings unless subpoenaed, no financial penalties beyond a return of the original purchase price to a victim restitution fund that Gringotts was establishing, and a formal acknowledgement in the settlement record that Rosier's query in 1988 demonstrated reasonable attempted due diligence, even if insufficient. Rosier's solicitor, a sharp-faced witch named Morven, went through the terms twice. Then Rosier signed. She looked at Harry after the signature was dry. The library at Caer Peveril, she said. There are books there that aren't in any other private collection in Britain. Some of them are pre-Hogwarts. You should know what you're getting. Thank you, Harry said. She nodded once, stood, and left with the particular posture of someone who has done a difficult thing correctly and is not looking for applause for it. Harry watched her go. One down, Astria said quietly. 4 to go, Harry said. And none of them are going to be like that. She was right. The committee convened the following Thursday under Amelia Bones, who had been confirmed to the panel along with Augusta Longbottom and a ministry legal examiner named Croker who specialized in contract fraud. Ragnarok's nomination of Bones had gone through without challenge, partly because nobody wanted to be seen opposing an investigative appointment in the current climate and partly because Amelia Bones had the reputation of a woman who found opposition professionally invigorating. She was a broad-shouldered witch in her mid-40s who wore a monocle and had the kind of stillness that very competent people develop when they've spent years in environments that reward competence and punish impulse. She read the Gringotts documentation in its entirety before the committee's first session and arrived having already written 12 follow-up questions, which she presented to Ragnarok at the start of proceedings with the comment that she expected complete answers and would know if she wasn't getting them. Ragnarok told Harry afterward that he liked her enormously. Lord Knott filed his counterclaim on the same day the committee convened, which was either coincidence or deliberate timing. Harry assumed deliberate. The counterclaim argued that the Slytherin lordship transfer was valid under ministry law, that the Gringotts suppression evidence was inadmissible because it relied on proprietary instruments that hadn't been independently certified, and that the claiming party, listed as the minor Harry James Potter with emphasis on minor that was doing a great deal of legal work, lacked standing to contest a lordship transfer without a Wisengamot-confirmed guardian. The guardian issue was the sharpest point. Astria's guardianship had been filed under Gringotts' emergency custody protocol, which was solid but had never been tested against a formal counterclaim. Knott's solicitors clearly thought they could unpick it. Harry read the counterclaim that evening in the guest suite and made 3 notes in the margin of the copy Phineas had brought him. Then he went to find Astria. She was in the small sitting room attached to her guest quarters, not reading or working but sitting with a glass of wine and the particular stillness of someone who is thinking hard about something they haven't quite articulated yet. She looked up when Harry appeared in the doorway. "Knott's counterclaim," he said. "I read it. He's going after your guardianship." "I know. Can it hold?" Harry asked. He sat down on the chair across from her, which was too large for him but he occupied it with his characteristic total occupancy, feet pulled up, completely at home in it. "The emergency custody protocol is solid. The Black family secondary claim is documented." She turned the wine glass in her hands. "But it hasn't been tested in court since 1923. And Knott's firm knows their historical case law." She paused. "If the guardianship is contested, we need to establish it independently of the emergency protocol. Something that can't be unpicked. Formal adoption," Harry said. Astria went still. "Not," Harry considered how to say this. "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking whether it's a legal option, because if it is, it removes the vulnerability entirely. A formal magical adoption makes you my guardian in a way that Knott's solicitors can't attack through custody protocol arguments." She was quiet for a long moment. "Magical adoption is permanent," she said. "It's not a legal arrangement. It changes the blood connection." "I know. You've known me for 2 weeks, Harry." "Yes." He met her eyes. "But you came down from Edinburgh in 4 hours when you got Ragnarok's letter, and the first thing you did when you sat down was tell me things about yourself that I probably needed to know and that you didn't have to tell me. And since then you've worked 17-hour days on this without being asked to, and last night you left a plate of food outside my door because you knew I'd forgotten to eat dinner." He paused. "I'm not asking because I need the legal protection, although I do. I'm asking because if you want to, I think it would be good. And if you don't, we find another way." Astria looked at him. She'd been looking at him like this since the first day, with the expression of someone who keeps encountering something that adjusts their calibration slightly. "Let me think about it," she said. "Of course," Harry said, and unfolded himself from the chair and went back to his work. She knocked on his door at 10:30. "Yes," she said. "I want to." Harry looked up from the parchment. Something moved through him that he didn't have a name for yet, something warm and specific, different from the satisfaction of a correct legal strategy or the cold clarity of a correct political move. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she agreed, with the same gruff brevity that meant neither of them was going to make a production of it. "We should tell Ragnar in the morning," Harry said. "Agreed." She looked at the parchment spread across the desk. "What are you working on?" "The creature inheritance. The specialist report came back today." He held it up. She came in and took it, scanning quickly. Her eyebrows rose. "Merlin. You've got black family on my mother's side," Harry said. 7 generations back, different branch from the Gryffindor line. The creature inheritance is elemental, specifically storm. Which apparently means, he took the report back and found the relevant section. Enhanced physical resilience. Accelerated magical core recovery. Instinctive magical channeling without a wand, in specific high-energy environments. And, he paused. "Parseltongue. You knew you had that," Astria said. She'd read the heritage tape. "I knew it was listed. I didn't know it was connected to the creature inheritance rather than the Slytherin blood." He set the report down. "It changes things slightly. The Parseltongue from the Slytherin line is hereditary and specific, it's the language gift. The elemental inheritance augments it. Makes it, more. More what? More than just speaking to snakes. According to the specialist, at sufficient magical development, elemental-grade Parseltongue can interface with any creature that uses instinctive rather than structured language. Including some magical creatures that nobody successfully communicated with before." He looked at the report. "Apparently this is extremely interesting to the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures." "I'll bet it is," Astria said dryly. "Please don't let them turn you into a research project." "I wasn't planning on it." She handed the report back. "Get some sleep, Harry." "In a while," he said, and turned back to the parchment. She was at the door when he said, without looking up, "Astria." "Yes." "Thank you," he said. "Just that." She stood there for a moment. "Don't thank me yet," she said, which was not quite a deflection. "We've still got 4 families to fight." But her voice was different from when she'd arrived 2 weeks ago, softer at the edges, less like someone performing competence and more like someone who had stopped performing it because they didn't need to anymore. The formal adoption process took 3 days to complete, because the magical component required a Gringotts certified blood ritual that was old and precise and not remotely painful but took several hours of careful preparation. Ragnar oversaw it personally. When it was done, the heritage tape updated itself, an automatic function of the bloodline recognition system, adding Astria Lyra Black Potter to Harry's line as guardian and magical parent, and adding Harry James Potter to the Black family line as acknowledged heir. Nott's legal challenge to the guardianship landed 2 days later. Phineas filed a response that was 4 pages long and spent most of them explaining that the challenged guardianship had been superseded by a formal magical adoption, certified by Gringotts, that predated Nott's filing by 48 hours, and that the relevant precedent for challenging a formal magical adoption was, to the best of anyone's knowledge, non-existent. Nott's solicitors went very quiet for about a week. Harry spent that week at Cair Peveril. He and Astria portkeyed there on a Thursday morning. The keys had been transferred from Rosier's estate agent with the quiet efficiency of a Gringotts managed property handover, and arrived in the entrance hall of a manor house that had been standing, in various states of repair, since the 12th century. Stone floors, deep-set windows, a staircase that had been rebuilt in the Tudor period and again in the Georgian and still felt older than both. The house smelled like old wood and something else, a deep, resonant magical saturation, the smell of a place where significant magic has been done for a very long time. Harry walked through it slowly. Astria walked with him, saying little, which was one of the things he was coming to appreciate about her. She didn't fill silence with words when silence was useful. The library was in the east wing. Rosier hadn't exaggerated. 3 rooms deep, floor-to-ceiling shelving on every wall, a rolling ladder system that looked hand-built and pre-industrial, and on the shelves, Harry stood in the doorway and looked, books. Hundreds of them. Some with magical covers that moved slowly, some with preservation charms visible as a faint gold shimmer on the spines, some that were simply old in the way that old things get when they've been handled by people for centuries and absorbed the residue of all that attention. He walked in. He ran his fingers along a shelf at random and let the titles register: Foundational Elemency and the Inherited Core, 1340. The Peveril Lineage and the Three Objects, a Private Accounting, undated. Parseltongue as Elemental Language, a Correspondence, 1410 to 1412. He stopped at that one. He pulled it out. It was thin, handwritten on parchment that had been bound with something that preserved it. The pages were soft but intact, the ink faded to a deep gray but entirely legible. He sat down on the floor of the library and started reading. Astrea found him there 2 hours later, cross-legged on the stone floor with 4 books spread around him and the expression of someone who has been moving quickly towards something for days and has just arrived at it. "Lunch," she said. "In a minute." "Harry. There's a correspondence here between 2 Peveril descendants from the 15th century, he said, without looking up. One of them was developing the theory that Parseltongue isn't a language, not in the way we understand language. It's an interface. A direct magical-to-magical communication pathway that, in someone with a sufficiently developed elemental core, could theoretically extend beyond snakes to any creature with a magical core of its own." He looked up. "Including magical beings. Goblins." Astrea stared at him. "You're saying you might be able to speak directly to what goblins are," he said. "Not gobbledygook. Not a translated approximation. The actual underlying magical communication pattern." He paused. "I haven't tested it. Ragnarok would be the appropriate person to test it with," she said carefully. "Yes." He closed the correspondence and stood, collecting the other books with the automatic tidiness of someone who has been living in a library-grade institutional setting for 3 weeks. "Lunch. Then I want to go through the rest of these shelves before we go back to London." They ate in the Manor's kitchen, which had been stocked by the Gringotts property team with provisions for a 2-day stay. Astrea made tea and Harry ate mechanically, still partly in the 15th century, and she let him be because she'd already figured out that this was how he processed things, through reading, through pattern recognition, through finding the shape of a system and then thinking about how to work within it or outside it as required. That afternoon he went through the rest of the library systematically, making notes of titles and locations. He wasn't reading everything, he was cataloging, building a map of what was there. He found 11 books that he wanted to read immediately, 6 that needed specialist assessment for historical value, and 1, slim, very old, bound in something that was definitely not leather but that he didn't want to examine too closely, that was warded with a recognition lock that opened when he touched it and for no other reason. Inside the locked book was a handwritten account of the Peveril family's understanding of the Deathly Hallows. Not legend, account. First-person records from 3 different generations, each adding their understanding to the previous, each contradicting the popular mythology in specific and interesting ways. He brought that one back to London in his pocket. The letter from Lord Selwyn arrived on Friday evening. Unlike Rosier's measured communication, Selwyn's letter was aggressive in the particular way of someone who has consulted several solicitors, liked none of their advice, and decided to go with what felt instinctively right, which was a mistake people with more money than wisdom often made. The letter stated that Selwyn considered Gringotts' inheritance determination politically motivated, that the transaction documents were subject to challenge on grounds of improper certification, and that Harry Potter should expect a full legal challenge to both the inheritance claim and the Gringotts charter provisions being used to support it. Harry read it, folded it, and gave it to Phineas without comment. Phineas read it with the expression of a man being given a gift. "He's challenging the charter," he said. "Can he?" Astrea asked. "He can try," Phineas said. The last time someone challenged the Gringotts Charter of 847 in a British court, the case was decided in 1203 and the challenging party lost their entire estate as a penalty for frivolous litigation. He looked at Harry over his glasses. "I'll file a response by Monday." Lord Flint, the 5th purchasing family, said nothing. Not a letter, not a counterclaim, not a communication through solicitors. Just silence, which was more interesting than Selwyn's noise. Harry asked Ragnarok to investigate quietly, and Ragnarok came back 3 days later with an interesting finding. Flint had approached 2 of the other purchasing families, Greengrass and Knott, apparently trying to organize a collective legal strategy. Both had declined. Greengrass was preparing his own accommodation with the committee, having read the direction of the wind from the moment the documentary evidence had gone up on the displaying stone in the Wisengamot chamber. Knott was fighting, but fighting alone. Flint, abandoned by his potential allies, was in a holding pattern. Harry left him there for now. The training began the second week at Gringotts. Astrea had been a professional which before she walked away from the wizarding world, and professional meant something specific in the Black family, which had produced several generations of genuinely talented practitioners. She'd kept her skills current through private practice, she'd never stopped, even in Edinburgh, even during the decade of structural engineering and deliberate distance from everything she'd grown up in. She set up a practice space in one of the unused vault-level rooms that Ragnarok made available, wide stone floor, high ceiling, no furniture. She brought in a set of professional dueling targets. She brought in a set of graduated resistance dummies. She looked at Harry standing in the middle of the empty space on the first morning and said, "What can you do?" "I don't know exactly," Harry said. "The bindings only came off 3 weeks ago." "Show me something, then." Harry thought for a moment. Then he raised his hand. No wand, he didn't have one yet. The wand question was genuinely complicated given the sheer number of cores and lineages he was working with, and Ragnarok was consulting an expert wand maker, and focused. The air in the room moved. Not a breeze from a vent, a genuine directional movement, pulling toward Harry and then radiating outward, the way air moves around a heat source. The nearest practice target rocked backward. The temperature in the room dropped 2 degrees and then stabilized. The light from the wall torches bent slightly, as if refracted. Astrea watched this without expression. "Elemental," she said. "Okay. No wand. How long can you sustain it?" "I don't know. I've only done small things. Moving objects. Once I made it rain inside, which was an accident." "Rained inside," she repeated. "I was angry." "Right." She crossed the room and produced 2 objects from her bag, a practice wand, a learner's instrument, flexible and forgiving, and a small bronze disc engraved with a magical focusing rune. "We're going to start with the wand anyway. The elemental inheritance is significant, but you need structured technique first. You need to understand the formal architecture before you start working outside it." She held the practice wand out. "Take this." He took it. The moment it touched his hand, it vibrated, not the gentle matching resonance of a wand greeting its owner, but a sharp, excessive response, like pressing a tuning fork against a church bell. Astrea looked at the wand. "You've never held a wand before." "No. And you're doing that to a practice wand just by holding it. Is that bad?" "It's," she thought, "instructive." She put the focusing disc in his other hand. "Hold both. The disc will regulate the flow. We're not trying to do anything spectacular. We're trying to figure out what your natural output level is so we can train it properly." The first session lasted an hour. Harry worked through basic exercises with the methodical focus he applied to everything, but the picture that emerged quickly was that his relationship with structured wand magic was unusual. He could produce spells cleanly, on first attempt, which was not what children who had never held a wand were supposed to be able to do. But the output was consistently excessive, illumos that lit the room rather than the wand tip, a Wingardium Leviosa that lifted not just the target feather but everything within a 3-foot radius, including Astrea's training notes. "You're not casting," Astrea said, after the notes came down. "You're saturating. Every spell is running at 10 times the necessary power because your core doesn't have any experience of calibration." "How do I calibrate it?" "Practice. You spend years learning how much to give each spell. You've been suppressed, so you haven't had years. She caught the notes and tucked them under her arm. Which means we compress years of calibration practice into whatever time we have. She looked at him. This is going to be frustrating. I don't mind frustrating. Good. Try finite incantatum and try to make it quiet. He tried. The first attempt was quiet enough to end a small war. The second was better. The third was, by the standards of a 7-year-old with a saturating core and no prior wand experience, extraordinary. Astria said nothing about that. She said, again. They trained every morning for 2 weeks. Harry worked the way he read, completely, precisely, without drama. He didn't get frustrated when something went wrong, he made a note of what went wrong and adjusted. He didn't preen when something went right, he moved immediately to the next problem. Astria had trained with black family practitioners since she was 4 years old, and she had never trained with anyone who improved at this rate, which was, she didn't say it. She moved the sessions to 2 hours, then 2.5, not because Harry needed pushing but because he kept going past the end of scheduled time and she might as well make it official. The Parseltongue test with Ragnarok happened on a Wednesday afternoon. Ragnarok had agreed with the careful neutrality of a professional who was genuinely scientifically curious and was managing it by being extremely formal about the process. They were in the inheritance office, just the two of them. Harry had asked for no audience, which Ragnarok had respected. He'd reviewed the Peveril correspondence that Harry had found in the library. He'd read the theory. I'm going to attempt to communicate through the elemental interface, Harry said. Not in gobbledygook. Not in English. If it works the way the correspondence describes, you should receive it as something that isn't quite either. Ragnarok inclined his head. Understood. Harry closed his eyes for a moment. The elemental inheritance, the thing that had been bound and was now unbound and was still in the process of being fully understood, had a particular sensation. Not external. Not like a second heartbeat or a passenger. More like a frequency, a specific harmonic that he'd been learning to locate and hold over the past weeks. He found it. He let it come up through the Parseltongue reflex, not the hissing snake speech that he'd accidentally used twice as a child and not known what it was, but the deeper current underneath it. He said something. Or did something. He was not entirely sure afterward which verb was right. Ragnarok sat very still. A long moment passed. Then the old goblin said, in a voice that was different from his usual voice, slower, more deliberate, as if finding words for something that didn't quite have them, I heard you. What did you hear? Not words, Ragnarok said. The concept underneath words. The intention. Directness. He was quiet for a moment. In 217 years of banking, I have had productive working relationships with many wizards. I have trusted a small number. I have never been spoken to by a wizard in the way I was just spoken to. What way? Harry asked. Ragnarok looked at him. As if I were fully what I am, he said. Not as a goblin. Not as a banking representative. As, fully. He stopped. The Peveril theory was correct. This should be documented. Yes, Harry said. But not publicly. Not yet. Ragnarok nodded slowly. He understood the value of things that only some people knew. News from the committee came in the third week. Amelia Bones had subpoenaed the ministry's dormancy and succession office records going back to 1980, which was a broader scope than anyone had expected, and suggested she had found something in the initial documents that she wanted to trace further. The dormancy office's acting head, the previous head having abruptly taken a leave of absence, which was not a good sign for the previous head, was cooperating with visible relief, providing everything requested with the speed of someone who wants to be clearly, demonstrably on the right side of history. Lord Greengrass requested a meeting with Phineas Webb on the same day the subpoena was announced. Harry let Phineas handle the preliminary conversation and read the notes that evening. Greengrass wanted to discuss terms. He was not contesting the claim. He was, however, attempting to negotiate the financial penalty component, which suggested he knew the evidence was insurmountable and was now trying to limit the damage. Harry wrote his response to Phineas on half a page, no negotiation on the penalty structure. Full Gringotts restitution calculation, as filed. He may choose how quickly he complies, but not how much. Phineas sent it. Greengrass took 3 days to respond and then agreed to the terms, which meant he had taken 3 days to confirm that he had no leverage and that Harry had correctly identified this. Fine. The Potter Lordship was formally returned to the Gringotts estate registry on a Monday morning, and when the notification arrived Harry was in the middle of a training session and looked at it for a moment and then set it down and went back to the calibration exercise Astrea had set him, which was exactly the right response. The Knott situation deteriorated that same week in a different direction. Theodore Knott, not Lord Knott Sr. but his son, who was 11 and apparently did not have the sense his father had in limited supply, managed to communicate with someone who communicated with someone who communicated with a journalist at a small publication called Arcane, which was the wizarding equivalent of a gossip supplement. The story that ran was about Harry, a breathless, slightly hysterical piece suggesting that the Potter heir was being manipulated by goblins with a financial agenda, that the so-called inheritance fraud was a manufactured claim designed to destabilize the wizarding government, and that the boy himself was, clearly not operating with full information or independent judgment, given his extreme youth and the suspicious circumstances of his discovery. Astrea read it and used language that Harry noted as informative in the education-expanding sense. Harry read it, set it down, and said, "Rita Skeeter. What about her? She said she'd been following the vault anomaly reports for 3 months. She's documented. She's at the Prophet." He looked at the arcane piece. "This is the Knott family's version of the story. We should make sure the Prophet has the real one, with full documentation, before this piece gets picked up anywhere with a larger readership. You want to brief Skeeter? I want to make the documented facts available to a reporter who has demonstrated she's been following the evidence," Harry said. "What she does with them is up to her. But if the story is going to be told, I'd rather it be told by someone who knows what a vault anomaly report looks like." Astrea considered. "Skeeter has a reputation for shaping stories, not just reporting them. This story doesn't need shaping. It's already shaped." He picked up the arcane piece. "But it does need someone who can read a transaction record." The Skeeter briefing happened 2 days later, in the Gringotts legal conference room, with Ragnarok and Phineas both present and explicit parameters established in advance. All information provided was on record and for attribution, no off-the-record sourcing, access to the documentary evidence in exchange for submission of all relevant copy to Phineas for factual review before publication. Skeeter had agreed to all of it without complaint, which told Harry something useful about how seriously she was taking this story. She worked through the transaction documents with the speed of someone who had been building toward this material for 3 months and knew exactly how to read it. She asked 14 questions, most of them sharp and some of them sharper than Harry had expected. She asked Harry too directly. "How do you feel about Dumbledore?" she said. Harry looked at her. "That's not a relevant question. It is for the readers." "Tell the readers what the documents say," Harry said. "That's more interesting than how I feel." She wrote something down. "Some people are going to say you're being used. By Gringotts, by the Black family connection, by whoever else has a stake in destabilizing the Wizengamot. What's the alternative?" Harry said. "I was in an alley. My core was bound 6 times over. My family's history had been sold off piece by piece while I was in a cupboard under the stairs. I'm not being used, I'm doing something about it. If someone else also benefits from that, that's fine. It doesn't change what the documents say." Skeeter looked at him for a moment. Then she wrote something longer. The piece ran that Saturday. It was, Harry read it carefully, factual. More than factual, it was meticulous. Skeeter had taken the documentary evidence and built a narrative around it that tracked the transactions chronologically, explained the inheritance law in terms that non-specialists could follow, and did not sensationalize the parts that didn't need sensationalizing, because they didn't need it. She'd included his quote. Verbatim. "I'm not being used, I'm doing something about it." By Sunday morning, every copy of that edition of the Daily Prophet had sold out. By Monday morning, the ministry's public correspondence office was reportedly experiencing unusual volume. By Monday afternoon, Dumbledore had given an interview to a different Prophet reporter, prearranged, controlled, in which he addressed the allegations with measured gravity and spoke at length about the complexity of wartime decisions and the weight of responsibility and the unfortunate nature of situations in which good intentions produced painful outcomes. Harry read the interview and went back to his calibration exercises. That evening, Astria came into the training room at the end of the session and watched him work through the last set of exercises, reducto at calibrated levels, which he'd been finding the hardest because the controlled destruction instinct ran counter to the elemental inheritance's tendency toward completeness, and when he finished she said, "Ragnarok wants to talk to us tonight. He's found something in the deeper committee documents. Something about where the money went. Beyond the accounts we already identified. Significantly beyond." She looked at him steadily. "He said it changes the scope of the case." Harry lowered the practice wand. "How much?" "He said, and Ragnarok almost never says things like this, that he'd rather tell us together, because he thinks it might be harder to hear than what we've already heard." Harry looked at the training room's stone wall for a moment. Then he said, "Fine. Let's go." Ragnarok was waiting in the inheritance office with Sharpclaw and two members of the legal team and a collection of documents that had clearly been assembled with some care, organized, flagged, in the specific arrangement of a professional who wants information delivered in the right order. He looked at Harry and Astria when they came in. He looked at Harry in particular, with the expression he sometimes used when he was about to say something he'd spent time deciding how to say. "There's a vault," Ragnarok said. "Account number 4471, registered to a charitable trust called the Greater Good Educational Foundation. It's been active since 1979 and it has received transfers from multiple sources over 20 years, including a significant portion of the funds generated by the Lordship sales." He paused. "The trust's stated purpose is funding for Muggle-born magical education programs." "Dumbledore's," Harry said. "Yes. But the charitable trust is a shell." Ragnarok set the key document on the table. "It has a secondary vault attached to it, 4471-B, that is not publicly registered and is not included in any ministry charitable foundation disclosure. And 4471-B has made a series of transfers, over the course of 15 years, to an account that," he stopped. "Started again. Harry. The secondary account is registered to a recipient we were not expecting." He put the final document on the table. Harry looked at it. He read the account holder name. He read it again. He was quiet for a long time. "Voldemort isn't dead," he said. It wasn't a question. "Not entirely," Ragnarok said quietly. "The account has been receiving funds continuously. Something has been drawing on it. Small amounts. Consistently. For 15 years. He looked at Harry directly. "Dumbledore has been, we believe, maintaining something. A residual. Keeping it contained, yes. But also, keeping it alive," Astria said. Her voice was very flat. "The evidence suggests," Ragnarok said carefully, "that the situation is significantly more complicated than a simple inheritance fraud. And that the prophecy Dumbledore has been holding over this case as leverage may not be leverage at all. It may be a central piece of a plan that has been running since 1981. Harry sat down. He looked at the document. He looked at the account number and the transfer records and the 15 years of small, consistent withdrawals that said something was there, something was sustained, something was being managed by the man who had been managing everything else. Then he looked at Ragnarok. "We need Amelia Bones," he said. "Not through the committee. Directly. Tonight if possible." "I can reach her," Ragnarok said. "And we need the Hall of Prophecy access," Harry said. The Slytherin claim. File it tomorrow morning. It will take time for the ministry to file it tomorrow morning, Harry said again. Not loudly. Not urgently. In the tone of someone who has shifted from one mode of operation to another and knows exactly which mode this is. We need to know what the prophecy actually says. Not what Dumbledore says it says. What it actually says. Ragnarok looked at him across the table. In 217 years, he had conducted a great many audits and managed a great many complex situations and believed that he had a reasonably good understanding of how things moved from complicated to resolved. He had never quite seen it move like this. First thing tomorrow, he said. The fire in Ragnarok's office grate burned low and orange while outside, in the early dark of an October evening, Diagon Alley went about its business without knowing what was sitting in a document on the inheritance office table, the thread that connected a stolen childhood to a 15-year-old account maintained in a dead man's name. The evidence that the story they'd been telling themselves about what this was had just expanded into something considerably larger and more dangerous and more necessary to resolve. Harry Potter sat in the inheritance office of Gringotts Bank and thought about chess, about shapes of conflict, about the specific quality of Dumbledore's expression in the Wizengamot chamber when he'd been recalculating. He'd been recalculating because he hadn't expected Harry to get this far this fast. Good, Harry thought. Keep recalculating. He had more moves. Chapter 5, The Price of a Greater Good. Amelia Bones arrived at Gringotts at 11:30 at night wearing a traveling cloak over what were clearly pajamas, which Harry respected enormously because it said something about how seriously she'd taken Ragnarok's message. Her monocle was in place. Her expression was the expression of a woman who has been woken with significant information and is choosing to process it as a professional rather than a person, which Harry recognized as a coping strategy and a useful one. She sat down at the inheritance office table, looked at the document Ragnarok placed in front of her, and read it completely before she said anything. This is the transfer record, she said. Account 4471B, continuous withdrawals. Since 1982, Ragnarok said. With the exception of a 3-month gap in late 1981 corresponding to the period immediately following the incident at Godric's Hollow. Bones looked at Harry. You understand what we're suggesting here? Something survived, Harry said. The attack didn't finish it. Dumbledore knows, and he's been managing the situation his own way for 15 years without telling the Wizengamot, the Ministry, or anyone else in a position to make decisions about it. That's an extraordinary claim. The transfer records are not extraordinary. They're documented. The claim follows from the documentation. Bones looked back at the papers. She had the specific stillness of someone running multiple calculations simultaneously and not letting any of them show on her face. If this is accurate, she said slowly, then what Dumbledore has been doing isn't simply fraud. It's unauthorized management of an unresolved magical threat at national scale, Astria said. While simultaneously robbing the person he claimed he was protecting against that threat. And imprisoning the legal guardian of that person, Harry added. Who might otherwise have been in a position to notice what was happening. Bones set the document down. She looked at Harry with the focused attention of someone reassessing their understanding of a situation in real time. How old are you? 7, Harry said. Almost 8. Right. She looked at Ragnarok. I need the full transfer chain. Every account that received funds from the charitable trust, every withdrawal from 4471B, and anything that traces the destination of those withdrawals. I also need your forensic instrument readings on the residual magical signature, if you've done them. We have, Ragnarok said. The signature on the withdrawing account matches the corrupted magical core signature that Gringotts Instruments recorded in 1981 when we updated our dark threat monitoring following Godric's Hollow. He produced another document. It is not identical to a living magical core. It is diminished. Fragmented. But it is continuous. It persisted, Bones said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. And Dumbledore's connection to this. The charitable trust, 4471, was established by Dumbledore and is administered by him. He has sole signature authority over both the primary and secondary vault. The transfers from 4471B to the residual account go through an intermediary step that was designed to be obscure, but the chain is traceable. We've traced it. Ragnarok set the chain document on the table. The transfers began in March 1982. 4 months after Godric's Hollow. The first transfer is small, 100 galleons. The frequency and size increased over time. The most recent transfer we can identify was 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago, Bones repeated. While he was Chief Warlock. While he was administering Harry's supposed guardianship. While the inheritance fraud was ongoing. Yes, Ragnarok said. Bones stood up and walked to the window. Not the window that faced the interior courtyard, the one that faced a blank stone wall, which suggested she needed to look somewhere without anything to see, just space to think. Harry let her think. Astria and Ragnarok both, by apparent instinct, did the same. After 2 minutes Bones turned around. I'm going to need to make this a full Department of Magical Law Enforcement investigation. Not just the committee has Wizengamot oversight, and right now the Wizengamot has several members who are implicated in the fraud and several more who are Dumbledore loyalists who will attempt to slow things down the moment they understand the scope. She looked at Harry. I need to keep this specific piece, the residual account, the transfers, away from the committee until I have enough to move on it comprehensively. How long? Harry asked. 2 weeks. Maybe 3. What happens to the Wizengamot committee work in the meantime? It continues. Everything we have on the Lordship fraud, the imprisonment of Sirius Black, the ministry officials, that all proceeds. It's the residual account that I need contained. She looked at Ragnarok. Who knows about this inside Gringotts? In this room, Ragnarok said, plus Sharpclaw and Ironmaw. No others. Keep it there. She picked up her traveling cloak. I'll have a formal evidence preservation order on the account documents by morning. Don't move them from the vault. She looked at Harry again, with the same focused reassessment. If what these documents suggest is accurate, Dumbledore has been running 2 parallel operations for 15 years. The fraud, which was about money and control. And something else, something to do with that residual, which he believes is about survival. Yours, possibly. Wizarding Britain's, certainly. In his understanding. He thinks he's the only one who can manage it, Harry said. Yes. Bones looked at him steadily. That belief is going to make him more dangerous as this closes in on him, not less. He won't break. He'll escalate. I know, Harry said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she put on her cloak, tucked the copy documents under her arm, and left at the efficient walk of someone with a significant amount of work to begin immediately. Astria waited until the sound of her footsteps had faded down the corridor. She's good, she said. Very, Ragnarok agreed. She's also right, Harry said. About Dumbledore escalating. He looked at the table. The document with the account number. He's going to try to talk to me again. He's going to try harder this time. We maintain the same position, Astria said. Any communication, he won't communicate, Harry said. Not through proper channels. He'll try to arrange something where he can speak to me without legal representation present. He looked at Ragnarok. What's his access to this building? Gringotts is warded against unauthorized entry at every level. He cannot enter without either a client appointment or an invitation from management. Ragnarok paused. He has a personal vault here, which gives him client access to the main hall. Can you revoke it? Ragnarok considered. We can suspend his account access pending the investigation, citing the inheritance fraud. It removes his legal right to enter the building. He looked thoughtful. It will be noticed. Good, Harry said. Suspend it. Tonight? Tonight. Ragnock made a note. It will reach him by morning. Good, Harry said again. He stood up. I need sleep. We all need sleep. He looked at the document on the table one more time. Leave the light on in here, he said, which was not a practical instruction. The torches were self-regulating, but something else. Something about not letting a room go dark when there was still work in it. He was almost at the door when Ragnock said, Harry. He turned. The old goblin looked at him across the document-covered table in the inheritance office that had become, over the past several weeks, the center of a considerably larger operation than either of them had anticipated. You're doing well, Ragnock said. And then, which was not something Harry had heard from him before, your parents would find this satisfying. From what the vault records tell me of who they were. Harry stood very still for a moment. Thank you, Ragnock, he said. Then he went to bed. He slept 6 hours. He was up at 5, reading the Peveril correspondence again by lamplight, when the first owl arrived. It wasn't from Dumbledore. It was from the Ministry's Hereditary Records Office, which had processed the Slytherin Lordship access claim and was writing to confirm that the Hall of Prophecy access petition was being reviewed by the Department of Mysteries under the Ancient Privileges framework. The letter's tone was bureaucratically careful in the way of a department that has been handed an unusual request and is trying very hard not to have an opinion about it. An hour later, a second owl arrived with a letter from Sirius Black's Azkaban case reference number. Not from Sirius, from the case administrator, a board-sounding ministry functionary who was writing to inform Harry Potter, listed as interested party under the newly registered legal guardianship chain, that the case had been referred to the improper use of emergency powers subcommittee and that a formal hearing had been scheduled for the 14th. The 14th was 8 days away. Harry was at breakfast with Astria and Ragnock going over the day's agenda when a third owl came, this one a large, dignified tawny bird that landed on the table with the air of something that expected to be received seriously. The letter was addressed in handwriting Harry had been shown as a reference by Ragnock 2 weeks ago. Small. Cramped. Careful. He opened it. Dear Harry, I find myself writing to you directly because the proper channels, as they have been structured, do not permit the kind of honest conversation I believe we need to have. I am not going to attempt to justify the decisions I've made through legal frameworks. You have clearly surrounded yourself with people who understand those frameworks far better than I would credit, and I have come to understand that you are not a child who responds well to being managed. What I would ask is simply this, an hour of your time. Without solicitors, without Gringotts representation, without documentation. Just a conversation between two people who are connected to each other in ways that the legal proceedings cannot fully account for. There are things about your situation, about the nature of what happened in 1981, about what I have spent 15 years protecting you from, that you deserve to know, and that I am not willing to commit to documents that will become evidence. I am at Hogwarts. I will remain available at your convenience. Yours, with genuine regret and genuine hope, Albus Dumbledore. Harry read it twice. Then he passed it to Astria, who read it once. Then to Ragnock, who read it and set it down. The residual account, Astria said. He knows we're getting close. He's been told about Bones's evidence preservation order, Harry said. Someone in the ministry told him last night, which means we have a leak in the DMLE or in the ministry's legal division, which is useful to know. He looked at the letter. He's offering to tell me about Voldemort. Voluntarily. Without documentation. Because anything he tells you without documentation can be denied later, Ragnock said. And because he thinks if he tells me himself, he can frame it in a way that makes what he's been doing seem necessary, Harry said. He thinks the prophecy and the threat will make me understand the rest of it. Or at least make me hesitate. He set the letter down. Write back. Tell him that if he has information relevant to my safety and to an ongoing unresolved magical threat, that information should be submitted to Amelia Bones at the DMLE, as she is conducting the relevant investigation, and to the head of the Department of Mysteries, who has statutory responsibility for prophecy management. And the conversation? Tell him I'll meet him. At the Wisengamot chambers. Session on record. Both legal teams present. His choice of date within the next 10 days. Harry picked up his tea. If what he knows is as important as he claims, it needs to be said where people can act on it. If he won't say it there, then it's not information he's offering, it's leverage. Astria wrote the response. The tawny owl took it and left with the same dignity it had arrived with. Dumbledore's reply came 4 hours later, which was faster than Harry had expected and told him something. The man was rattled enough to respond quickly, which was not characteristic of someone operating from confidence. The reply said that he understood Harry's position, that he regretted it, and that he would consider the parameters Harry had proposed. He didn't agree. He didn't refuse. He said he would consider. He's buying time, Astria said. Yes, Harry said. So we don't give him any. The Hall of Prophecy petition was approved that afternoon, which was considerably faster than the Hereditary Records Office's letter had implied. Harry suspected Amelia Bones had made a phone call, so to speak, had communicated to the Department of Mysteries that expediting this particular petition was in the interests of an active DMLE investigation. The approval letter was signed by an unspeakable who identified themselves only as a title, Keeper of the Hall, and included a date, Friday morning. Which gave them 4 days. They spent those days in overlapping preparation. Ragnarok's legal team finalized the restitution documentation for the Wisengamot Committee, the full financial calculation, 23 million galleons, itemized and sourced. Phineas prepared the formal challenge to Selwyn's counterclaim, which was going to be heard by the committee on Thursday and which Phineas privately considered one of the more enjoyable legal exercises of his career. Astria continued Harry's training with increasing intensity, and Harry continued improving at the rate that made her stop mid-session sometimes and just watch him for a moment, recalibrating. He was working with the wand correctly now, not fighting against the saturation but learning to set the output level before the spell, the way you'd adjust a tap before turning it rather than after. The elemental inheritance had begun to integrate with the structured technique in ways the Peveril correspondence had predicted and that Astria found genuinely interesting as a practitioner. Fire answered differently than most people's fire. Water was unnecessary to invoke, the air around Harry shifted its moisture content when he focused, producing humidity or dryness as a side effect of emotional state, which they were working on because he didn't need his emotional state legible in the weather. He was also reading. Voraciously, specifically, with the Cair Peveril library now being accessed remotely through a book retrieval charm Ragnarok had set up. He was building a theoretical framework, not just for what his inheritance meant but for what the magical system underlying all of it was. The old magic. The stuff that predated Hogwarts, predated the Wisengamot, predated the established categories of dark and light that the modern wizarding world ran everything through. He'd found 3 books that touched on what Voldemort had done in 1981. Not referring to Voldemort specifically, they were centuries old, but describing the theoretical basis for a magical attack that rebounds. The consequences of attempting to kill someone whose blood carries the particular density of Old Covenant magic, which does not absorb lethal force the same way newer magical bloodlines do. The rebound doesn't destroy the attacker. It fragments them. And a fragment, if given the right conditions, it can sustain itself, he told Astria on Wednesday night, the Peveril book open on the table. Not as a person. Not with a body. But the magical core doesn't dissolve. It anchors to something. An object. A living host. The fragment is still connected to the original magical signature, which is why the withdrawal transactions carry the same signature as the pre-Godric's hollow readings. Astria looked at the book. Dumbledore knows this. He's known it since 1981. Probably longer, he would have recognized the theoretical possibility the moment he saw the aftermath. The body destroyed but the magical signature still present. Harry looked at the text. He's been managing the fragment. Containing it. Making sure it doesn't find a stable anchor. He paused. Or he says he's containing it. But the transfer amounts have been increasing, Harry said. Not dramatically, but consistently, year over year, slightly more. Something that's being contained doesn't require more resources each year. Something that's recovering does. Astria was very still. He might genuinely have started it as containment, Harry said. And then at some point it stopped being containment and became something else, and he didn't want to admit it, or didn't recognize it, or did recognize it and decided he could still manage it on his own because that's what he does. He closed the book. We're going to need the prophecy. We're going to need to know what it says before we're in a room with him, because whatever it says, that's what he's been building his justification around for 15 years. Thursday's committee session on Selwyn's counterclaim lasted 40 minutes, which was either a very good sign or a very bad one. 40 minutes was either decisive rejection or a devastating surprise, and it turned out to be the former. The committee rejected Selwyn's challenge to the Gringotts charter provisions in its entirety, with a written note from Amelia Bones's co-panelist Croker that the legal basis for the challenge was, and Harry appreciated this phrasing, historically illiterate. The precedent from 1203 was cited. Selwyn's solicitors filed a notice of intent to appeal, which they had the right to do, and which would take 6 months, which they also knew. Lord Flint, who had been watching all of this, sent his solicitor to Phineas that afternoon with a request to discuss terms. Harry authorized a meeting. The terms he proposed were identical to what he'd proposed to Greengrass: full restitution, no negotiation. Flint's solicitor said his client needed time to review. Harry said he had 1 week. He was increasingly uninterested in the people who needed time to review what was obvious. Friday morning was cold and grey, the kind of London autumn that settles into the stone of old buildings and doesn't leave. Harry and Astria and Ragnarok took the Gringotts transit to the Ministry of Magic, emerged into the atrium, and were met by an unspeakable who introduced himself only as Keeper and was wearing the deep blue robes of the Department of Mysteries over a face that was pleasantly unremarkable in a way that might have been natural or might have been deliberate. "Mr. Potter," he said. "The petition for Hall of Prophecy access under the Slytherin Lordship privilege has been reviewed. The privilege is valid. However," he paused. "There are some unusual circumstances we should discuss before you enter the hall." "What circumstances?" Harry said. "The prophecy record you have come to access." The Keeper's pleasantly unremarkable face was very careful. "It has been tampered with." Ragnarok made a sharp sound. Astria went absolutely still. Harry looked at the Keeper directly. "Tampered with how?" "The spun glass record is intact. No one has physically accessed the hall under the record's location. But our instruments detected, approximately 6 weeks ago, an external resonance being applied to the record. Not an access attempt, something different. More like," the Keeper searched for words, "an attempt to overlay additional information on the existing prophecy. To modify what it says." "Modify it," Harry said. "Who can do that?" "In theory. No one. Prophecies are immutable once spun. They record what was said at the moment of making." The Keeper looked at Harry. "In practice, we have now detected that someone with deep familiarity with the hall's magical architecture attempted to create a resonance overlay, something that would cause a listener to receive additional context, framing, a particular interpretation, when the prophecy was accessed. So the prophecy itself isn't changed," Harry said. "But someone tried to make sure anyone who heard it would hear it a certain way." "Yes. Precisely. Can you remove the overlay?" "We already have. When the attempt was detected, we applied a purification to the record. What you will hear is the original. Unadorned." Harry looked at Ragnarok. Ragnarok looked at Harry. "He knew we were coming," Ragnarok said quietly. "Before the petition was even filed. He's had someone watching the Slytherin privilege framework," Harry said. "Watching for when it would be used." He turned back to the Keeper. "Can you identify who applied the overlay? The resonance signature is being analyzed." "It is," the Keeper paused, and something moved through his careful expression. "It is consistent with a magical signature we have on file." I cannot share the details of that identification without legal authorization, but I can tell you that it did not come from inside the department. Harry took a breath. Let's go. The Hall of Prophecy was vast in the way of places designed to contain things that matter across long spans of time, high shelving, deep aisles, the glass orbs glowing with their own soft internal light, each one a moment of foresight made permanent. The keeper led them down the central aisle to row 97, subsection 11, and stopped at a particular orb that looked, to Harry's eyes, identical to every other one except for the label on its shelf bracket, SPT to APWBD. The Dark Lord and Harry Potter. Harry looked at the label. The question mark. Even the prophecy hadn't been entirely sure. He reached up and took the orb off the shelf. It was warmer than he expected, or maybe that was the elemental inheritance, which tended to make him attuned to thermal variations. It fit easily in his palm. The light inside it was white and steady. To hear it, the keeper said, you simply hold it and allow it to resonate. Your lordship claim establishes the listening right. Harry held it and allowed it. The voice that came from the orb was thin and strange, the voice of someone speaking in a trance, the specific quality of a seer mid-vision, all the ordinary social texture of speech stripped away and replaced by something more mechanical and more true. The voice was female, and it said, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the seventh month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the seventh month dies. The orb went quiet. The light continued, steady and white. Harry stood in the aisle of the Hall of Prophecy and turned the orb over in his hand and thought. Power the Dark Lord knows not, Astrea said quietly. She wasn't asking. The love interpretation, Ragnarok said. Dumbledore's interpretation, based on how he's described it to various parties over the years. The power is love, the sacrifice your mother made, the protection it created. Maybe, Harry said. He was looking at the orb. Or maybe the power is something else. Something that the Dark Lord, a half-blood who never knew his father's family, who suppressed his own heritage, who built his identity entirely around the pure-blood framework he was excluded from, specifically and categorically does not have and cannot acquire. He set the orb back on the shelf. The 33 crowns, Astrea said. She was looking at him. Old magic, Harry said. Pre-Hogwarts magic. The kind that runs through lines so deep they predate the categories of dark and light and the ideological frameworks that Voldemort built his entire worldview on. He turned to face them. He marked me as his equal. The prophecy says it. But equal means comparable, and you can't be comparable to something you don't understand exists. He thought he was attacking a child. He was attacking the heir of 33 houses carrying Old Covenant magic and a creature inheritance and the Deathly Hallows in a family vault. He paused. That's why it rebounded the way it did. Not just love, though that was part of it. The sheer volume of old magic concentrated in one point. Ragnarok was very quiet. And Dumbledore's interpretation was, simpler, Harry said. Easier to control. If the power is love, then the solution is to raise me in conditions that produce a certain kind of suffering, so that the love I'm capable of is appropriately shaped and directed. If the power is inheritance, if the power is the 33 crowns and everything that comes with them, he looked at the shelf. Then I need to know what I am and I need to claim it. And he can't control that. Astrea breathed out. He was suppressing you, she said. Not just to steal the lordships. To make sure you didn't become something he couldn't manage. Both things served the same purpose. Harry turned and walked back toward the central aisle. He wanted the money, yes. He wanted the control, yes. But underneath that, he was terrified of what I might become if nobody managed the process. He thought he was the only one capable of managing it correctly. He walked steadily. He was wrong about that. But I don't think he was lying to himself about his reasons. That's what makes him difficult. They emerged from the Department of Mysteries into the Ministry corridors, and Harry was immediately aware of the ambient change in the building's atmosphere. Not dramatic, nothing visible. But the specific quality of hushed, rapid movement activity that means something has happened while you were elsewhere. A Ministry official recognized Ragnarok and crossed to them quickly, with the expression of someone delivering urgent news to a relevant party. Mr. Stonefist. I was asked to find you. Amelia Bones has made 2 arrests this morning under DMLE authority. Ragnarok's expression didn't change. Who? Bartemius Crouch Sr., Deputy Head of Magical Law Enforcement. And Dolores Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister. The official paused. Both on charges of unauthorized processing of fraudulent ministry filings, specifically the Lordship transfer documents and the serious black imprisonment order. Harry absorbed this. Crouch signed off on the black imprisonment without the required judicial authorization, Astrea said. He countersigned Dumbledore's order. We had that in the documentation. Yes, the official said, looking at Harry with an expression that was clearly trying not to be odd. Umbridge processed 6 of the Lordship transfers through the dormancy office. Her signature was on the approval documents. He looked back at Ragnarok. MS. Bones says to tell you that the second phase of the investigation is now active and that she would appreciate a meeting at your earliest convenience. This afternoon, Ragnarok said. Tell her we'll come to her. The official departed. Harry, Astrea, and Ragnarok stood in the ministry corridor for a moment. The serious hearing is Monday, Harry said. The committee should have the arrests as new evidence by then. I'll make sure it reaches Longbottom and Croaker tonight, Ragnarok said. Astrea was looking at Harry with the expression she sometimes used, the one that meant she was about to say something real rather than tactical. How are you holding up, she said. Not legally. Actually. Harry considered this seriously, because she'd asked seriously. The thing about the overlay, he said. That Dumbledore tried to change what the prophecy would sound like before I heard it. He looked at the corridor wall. I knew he was dangerous. I knew he was intelligent and adaptive. But that's specific. He knew we'd filed the petition, and instead of trying to stop it, he tried to preload what I'd conclude from it. He paused. He's been doing that my whole life. Not lying exactly. Framing. Making sure the information I received would lead to the conclusions he needed me to have. And now? Astrea said. Now I hear things without his framing, Harry said. It's better. It's also, he considered, a lot. There's a lot to hear. He looked at her. But I'm managing. She nodded. Didn't push. Understood that managing, from Harry, was not a deflection but an accurate report. The meeting with Bones was in her DMLE office, which was a study in organized severity, clear desk, no decorative items, a window that looked out on nothing scenic because the desk was oriented toward the door, which was the orientation of someone whose primary professional interest is what comes through that door and what to do about it. Bones had clearly been moving fast all day and had not slowed for anything, but she didn't look harried. She looked like a woman who is operating exactly at the level her abilities are suited to and finds it clarifying. Crouch and Umbridge are in ministry holding, she said, without preamble. Neither of them is going to be a problem. Crouch is already asking to cooperate in exchange for a reduced charge, and Umbridge is being Umbridge, which means she's going to deny everything loudly until the documents make it impossible. She looked at Harry. Crouch's cooperation is potentially valuable. He knows who else in the ministry had knowledge of the black imprisonment. He may know about the Lordship transfers. He'll minimize his own role, Harry said. Of course. That's manageable. What I need from you, she looked at Ragnarok, is the Gringotts forensic analysis of the residual account transfers. I'm ready to move on that piece now. The ministry leak has been identified, she set a brief report on the table, a junior analyst in my own department who was feeding information to the Hogwarts administration office. He's been suspended pending investigation. He told Dumbledore about the evidence preservation order, Harry said. Yes. And about the Hall of Prophecy petition, based on what you've described. She tapped the report. Dumbledore now knows that we know about the residual account. And he knows we know about the overlay attempt on the prophecy. She looked at Harry directly. Which means he knows we're much further along than he'd hoped. And it means that whatever he does next, he does it with that knowledge. He'll move to engage, Harry said. He'll stop waiting for me to agree to meet him privately. He'll do something public. I think so too, Bones said. She looked at Ragnarok. I'm requesting that Gringotts provide the forensic analysis formally, so it can be submitted as DMLE evidence. That gives me authority to open an investigation under the Magical Threats to Public Safety Act, which carries considerably more weight than the committee's fraud investigation. Different powers. Different urgency. I can have the documentation certified and transferred tonight, Ragnarok said. Good. Bones looked at Harry. Monday's hearing for Sirius Black. Are you planning to attend? Yes, Harry said. I'm going to recommend that the hearing be moved from the subcommittee to a full Wizengamot session. With Crouch arrested and the authorization chain for the imprisonment order now in direct question, the subcommittee doesn't have sufficient standing to make the relevant decisions. She paused. A full session means Dumbledore will be there. I know, Harry said. He may try to use it, he'll try to use everything, Harry said. That's fine. He can try. Bones looked at him for a moment with the same expression Amelia Bones occasionally wore when she encountered something that required her to update a prior assessment. Then she nodded. Monday morning. I'll file the motion to escalate today. The motion was granted by Friday evening. Bagnold, still performing competently as acting chief warlock, approved the escalation and scheduled a full session for Monday at 9. The official notice went out through the Wizengamot standard communication channels, which meant that by Saturday morning every member with a seat knew that the Sirius Black matter was going to a full session. It also meant Dumbledore knew. His response came Saturday afternoon. Not a letter this time, a formal request, filed through the Wizengamot secretary, to address the session. He was requesting speaking rights at Monday's full session on the matter of Sirius Black. Harry sat with that for a minute. Dumbledore, requesting speaking rights at the session where they were going to try to free Sirius. He was going to argue for Sirius's continued imprisonment. In front of the full Wizengamot. With Crouch arrested, with the Lordship investigation ongoing, with the DMLE now running a parallel case on the residual account. He's going to argue that Sirius is actually guilty, Astria said. He's going to argue that the manner of imprisonment was flawed but the underlying conclusion was correct, Harry said. He's going to argue that Sirius Black cannot be safely released regardless of the procedural failures, because the threat environment, Voldemort's survival, makes it necessary to err on the side of caution. He's going to invoke the residual, Ragnarok said. Yes. Voluntarily. In session. On record. Harry set down Dumbledore's request. He's decided to stop waiting. He's going to use Monday as his forum. He looked at Astria. Which means we need to be completely ready. Saturday evening, Sunday in its entirety, and the early hours of Monday morning went into preparation. Not just legal preparation, Ragnarok and Phineas had that covered. The Sirius case documents were organized and complete and the Crouch arrest had been formally added to the evidence chain. But the other preparation. The kind that doesn't go into files. Harry sat with Astria at the kitchen table of the guest suite at 11 Sunday night with 2 cups of tea and the specific companionable quiet of people who have spent enough time working together to know when talking is useful and when it isn't. After a while he said, "Tell me about Sirius." She looked at the table. He was loud, she said. Not in an empty way. He was funny the way people are funny when they're also genuinely intelligent, the humor wasn't the thing, it was a delivery mechanism for the actual thing. She paused. He was the first black family member I knew of who openly didn't care about blood status. Not just privately, openly. At school, from the beginning. Which in our family was significant. She wrapped her hands around the mug. He was the one person in the family I believed actually meant what he said. And he's been in Azkaban for 15 years, Harry said. 15 years for something he didn't do, Astria said. With the Dementors. And the Dementors, she stopped. I know what Dementors do, Harry said. He'd read about them. He understood them in the way you understand something terrible from a distance, which is not the same as the way Sirius Black understood them from very close and for very long. If he comes out, Astria said. Then she stopped and started again. When he comes out. He's not going to be, the person I described isn't the person who'll walk out of there. He'll need time, Harry said. And people who don't expect him to immediately be fine. Yes. We're good at that, Harry said. Not expecting people to immediately be fine. She looked at him. Yes, she said. We are. Monday morning arrived in the Wizengamot chamber with the specific weight of a session that everyone present understood was not ordinary. The gallery was packed, tighter than the inheritance hearing, which Harry wouldn't have thought possible. The press gallery was at 3 times its capacity, people standing behind the seats. Every Wizengamot member who held a seat was present, including those who hadn't attended a session in years. Dumbledore was in his seat in the 3rd tier. He had worn his Wizengamot robes today, not his usual sweeping purple, but the formal dark blue of a member in good standing. The robes were, Harry noted, also the robes of someone who considered today official. Who had decided that today was a formal occasion requiring formal presentation. He sat very still, with the composed gravity of a man who has thought carefully about what he intends to say and has decided to say it. Harry sat at the presenting table on the floor, with Ragnarok and Phineas on one side and Astria on the other. Bagnold called the session. The Sirius Black case number was read into the record. The grounds for review: procedural failure in the imprisonment authorization, new evidence regarding the countersigning official, and the heritage documentation establishing Black as Harry Potter's legal magical guardian, were summarized by Phineas in 6 precise minutes. Then Bagnold said, "The chair recognizes Albus Dumbledore, who has requested speaking rights." Dumbledore stood. The chamber went quiet, not the gradually settling quiet of a crowd losing interest in other conversations, but the immediate, attending quiet of a room that has been trained over decades to listen when this person speaks. He looked around the chamber. He didn't look at Harry first, he looked at the chamber, at the faces he knew, at the institution he had helped to shape over the course of 40 years as Chief Warlock. Then he looked at Harry. "I owe this body an explanation," he said. His voice was exactly what it always was, deep, measured, carrying without effort. "And I owe Harry Potter an honesty that I have, for reasons I will explain, withheld until now." He paused. Sirius Black is innocent of the charges for which he was imprisoned. He did not betray the Potters. He did not commit the murders he was accused of. He was imprisoned in error, on my recommendation, and that error has caused him 15 years of unjust suffering for which I take full responsibility. The chamber detonated. Harry watched Dumbledore while the noise ran its course. He had not moved. He was not performing contrition, he was stating facts in the particular register of someone who has decided that the moment for management is over and the moment for honesty has arrived. He waited for the noise to subside. "The reason I made that recommendation in 1981, Dumbledore said, when the chamber was quiet enough, was not because I believed Sirius Black was guilty. It was because I believed, and this is the part that this body needs to hear clearly, that Voldemort was not destroyed. That something of him survived the night at Godric's Hollow. And that in the environment of extreme confusion and danger that followed that night, releasing an emotional and unpredictable man who was the Potter heir's magical guardian into a situation I could not control was a risk I was not willing to take. You imprisoned an innocent man, Augusta Longbottom said, from the second tier, to control a situation. Yes, Dumbledore said. That is what I did. And the Lordship transfers? Said another member. The funds generated by the Lordship transfers supported operations that I believed were necessary to address the ongoing threat, monitoring, containment, research into the nature of Voldemort's survival. The method was, he paused. The method was wrong. The justification, I continue to believe, was sound. You cannot separate the choices from the context of what I was managing. What you were managing, Harry said, was something you'd decided belonged to you. The chamber went silent again. Every face turned toward the center of the floor, where Harry was sitting with his hands flat on the table and his green eyes on Dumbledore in the third tier. You decided that you were the right person to make these decisions, Harry said. About Sirius. About the Lordships. About where I lived and what I knew and what I was allowed to be. You decided that because you had the most information, you were entitled to the most authority. And you maintained that authority through a 15-year series of choices that left an innocent man in Azkaban, left me in a cupboard under some stairs, and left Wizarding Britain operating on a false picture of its own security situation. He looked directly at Dumbledore. You're very intelligent. You meant well, in the sense that your intentions were oriented toward outcomes you genuinely valued. But meaning well and having authority over other people's lives are not the same thing. And in the gap between those two things, a very large amount of damage was done. Dumbledore looked at him. The grave, kind expression was still there, it was always still there, Harry thought, because it was genuine, that was the hardest thing about him, but something beneath it had shifted. You're right, Dumbledore said. Quietly. On every point. I know, Harry said. I need the chamber to know too. Bagnold, who had been watching this exchange with the expression of someone trying to determine whether to intervene and concluding that the best thing she could do for these proceedings was stay out of the way of them, cleared her throat. The chair would like to proceed to the formal decision on the matter of Sirius Black. In light of the confession entered into the record by Albus Dumbledore, she let that phrase sit, and the documentary evidence previously submitted, the chamber is asked to vote on the motion for immediate release and full exoneration. He'll need medical attention first, Bones said, from her seat. 15 years with Dementors. Full St. Mungo's evaluation before release is mandatory under the Prisoner Welfare Act. Agreed, Bagnold said. The motion includes provision for immediate St. Mungo's care followed by release. All in favor. Harry had counted the votes 3 times over the past week. He knew the math. He also knew that knowing the math and watching it happen were different things, and when the hands went up, and kept going up, more than the minimum, considerably more, he felt the thing that had moved through him when Rosier's signature dried, the thing he didn't have a name for yet, but larger. The motion passes, Bagnold said. Sirius Black is exonerated. The case of his imprisonment is remanded to the DMLE for investigation. She looked at Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore will be required to appear before this body for formal proceedings regarding the charges that arise from his statements today. Those proceedings will be scheduled at the earliest available session. She paused. In the interim, the question of whether he may continue as headmaster of Hogwarts while under active Wizengamot investigation is referred to the Board of Governors for immediate review. Additionally, Bones said, standing, I am formally informing this chamber that the DMLE has opened an investigation under the Magical Threats to Public Safety Act regarding the survival of a significant dark magical entity and its management over the past 15 years. This investigation runs parallel to the Wizengamot proceedings and its findings will be reported to this body upon completion. She looked around the chamber. Until that investigation is resolved, I am recommending that all persons with relevant information be made available for DMLE interviews. All persons. She looked briefly but explicitly at Dumbledore. Dumbledore inclined his head. I will cooperate fully, he said. With everything. He said it without the tone of someone who expected that to fix anything. He said it like someone who has decided that the only thing left to do is to be useful, which was not nothing, and was also not enough, and which he appeared to understand was both of those things. Harry sat at the presenting table in the center of the Wisengamot chamber while the session dissolved into motion around him, members rising, speaking, organizing, and held very still. Sirius Black would be at St. Mungo's by nightfall. Dumbledore's trial would be scheduled within the week. The DMLE investigation was active. Flint had until tomorrow to agree to restitution terms. The not-legal challenge was going to collapse under the weight of the committee's findings, and when it did, the Slytherin Lordship would come home. There was still the matter of the fragment. The residual account. Something that was not quite a person and not quite gone, sustained by 15 years of Dumbledore's management and Dumbledore's money, some of which had come from Harry's own inheritance. He thought about that. He thought about what it meant that Voldemort's survival had been partly funded by the stolen legacy of the person the prophecy said could vanquish him. The irony was the kind that old stories were full of. The villain, inadvertently funding the thing that would end them. Dumbledore, trying to control both sides of a prophecy, accidentally making both sides more powerful. He thought about power the Dark Lord knows not. He thought about 33 houses, an old covenant magic, and a creature inheritance, and a library in Wales full of things nobody had read in centuries, and a woman from Edinburgh who had come down in 4 hours when called, and a goblin who had been doing this work for 217 years and had decided, in an alley in Surrey, that this was the case that mattered. He thought about his parents, mid-laugh in a moving photograph. He thought about Sirius Black, who was going to wake up tomorrow somewhere that wasn't Azkaban. He picked up his quill and turned to a fresh piece of parchment and began to write the next list of things to do, because the work wasn't done, it was never done, that was the nature of it, and that was fine. He had time. He had everything he needed. And he was only almost 8 years old.